Before the world began, there was nothing but an endless void, and from that void, a giant was born, Ymir, the first of his kind. From his body would rise gods, giants, and the 9 worlds themselves. These are the stories of Odin, the All-Father, who gave an eye for wisdom, Thor, who carried the hammer that shook mountains, and Loki, the trickster whose schemes would bring about the end of all things. This is not just mythology. These are the Viking sagas, the tales that shaped an age of warriors, explorers, and dreamers. Tonight, we journey into the entire story of Norse mythology, from creation to Ragnarök, long before men raised their ships upon the seas, long before kings carved their names into stone. There was nothing, only a yawning void of silence, called Ginnungagap. To the north lay the realm of mist and ice, to the south the realm of fire and flame. And when the two met in that endless darkness, life was sparked into being. From the melting ice rose a giant, Ymir, the first of all beings. From his sweat and his breath came others like him, frost giants, ancient and terrible. But as the flames licked the ice, another form appeared, the great cosmic cow, Auhamla, whose milk fed the first giant, and whose tongue licked at the salty ice until a new figure emerged, Buri, the forefather of the gods themselves. This was a world not of peace, but of struggle. From Ymir's body came entire races of giants, forces of chaos, and from Buri's line came Odin, Vili, and Ve, the first gods, who looked upon Ymir with fear and hatred. For the giants threatened to consume everything, so they struck. And when Ymir fell, his blood became the oceans, his bones the mountains, his skull the sky. From the corpse of a giant, the 9 worlds were born. It is a story of creation through destruction, a theme that echoes again and again in Norse myth. For these were not gentle tales. They were sung by warriors beside crackling fires, whispered by sailors who faced endless seas, and remembered by those who believed that life itself was a battle against the inevitable. From that first slaying came a cosmos both wondrous and fragile. The gods built Asgard, their shining hall, high above the clouds. They created Midgard, the world of men, a place bound by walls to protect it from the giants outside. And still, beyond the gods' halls and human lands, stretch the other realms, fiery Muspelheim, icy Niflheim, the misty lands where hell ruled the dead, and the great roots of Yggdrasil, the world tree, whose branches and roots bound all 9 realms together. But this was only the beginning. For the stories of the Norse are not just about gods and giants, but about fate. Every being, no matter how mighty, was bound to destiny. Odin, the All-Father, would sacrifice himself for wisdom. Thor, strongest of gods, would fight endlessly against the giants, yet fall at the jaws of a serpent. Loki, friend and betrayer, would weave schemes that tore the worlds apart, and in the end, all creation would burn in Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods. For the next few hours, we will journey together into these myths, from the first spark of creation, to the deeds of Odin and Thor, to the cunning of Loki, and finally, the end of all things. These are stories filled with mystery, with strangeness, with violence, and with beauty. And though they were sung 1,000 years ago in icy northern halls, their echoes remain. In the words we speak, in the days of our week, even in the stories told on our screens today. So settle in. Let the ancient sagas guide you. Tonight, we begin the entire story of Norse mythology, from the birth of the cosmos to the doom of the gods and the rebirth beyond. Under the endless sweep of the northern skies, where winter nights stretch into eternity and the aurora dances like ghostly ribbons of green and gold, there was once a world born from fire and ice. It is here, in this stark and haunting landscape, that the stories of the Norse gods begin, long before the written word. Before parchment and ink captured these myths, They lived in the breath of the skalds, the poets and storytellers, who carried them from hall to hall, fire to fire, across the dark forests and frozen seas. These tales were not simply entertainment. They were explanations for the inexplicable. Why storms raged, why the sun returned after the darkness, why men must face war, hunger, and death. They were the spiritual backbone of a people who carved out their survival in one of the harshest corners of the earth. The Norse creation story begins not with a garden, nor with a divine word, but with a yawning gap, a cosmic emptiness known as Ginnungagap. In this void, there was nothing, and yet from this nothingness arose the potential for everything. 2. The north of Ginnungagap lay the realm of Niflheim, a land of mist, frost, and eternal cold. To the south lay Muspelheim, a realm of fire, searing heat, and blazing light. These two primordial forces, ice and fire, began to creep toward one another, their breath meeting in the void. From their clash of opposites came life, the first stirring of being. When the melting ice of Niflheim touched the fiery sparks of Muspelheim, great rivers formed, and from this fusion of elements emerged Ymir, the primordial giant. Ymir was not merely a creature of flesh and bone. He embodied the raw chaos of creation itself. His body sweated, and from the sweat of his arms and legs sprang more beings, the race of frost giants. These Jotnir, as they were called, would become a perpetual thorn in the side of the gods yet to come, embodiments of wildness and disorder. But alongside Ymir, another miracle was born. From the melting ice came a cow, Audhumla, the great nourisher. Her milk flowed endlessly, sustaining Ymir and allowing creation to continue. Audhumla herself fed by licking the salty ice blocks, and from this act of devotion something remarkable emerged. As she licked, the shape of another being appeared within the ice, day by day taking form until at last a man stood revealed, Buri, the first of the gods. Buri fathered Bor, and Bor took as his wife a Jotis. Their children were Odin, Vili, and Vi, 3 brothers who would reshape the cosmos. It is from these figures that the saga of order, civilization, and divinity begins. But the act of creation was not without violence. Odin and his brothers looked upon Ymir, this colossal giant, and understood that only through his destruction could the cosmos be ordered. They struck him down in a battle of unimaginable scale, and as Ymir fell, the world itself began to take shape. From his flesh, they created the earth. From his blood, they made the seas and lakes. His bones became mountains, his teeth the cliffs, his hair the trees, and from his skull they shaped the dome of the heavens. His brain, scattered across the sky, became the clouds. In this grim, yet wondrous act, the Norse gods displayed a vision of creation that was both brutal and beautiful. Life built upon death, order forged from chaos to guard this new cosmos. Odin and his brothers placed for dwarves at the corners of the sky, tasked with holding it aloft. They named them Nori, Suri, Austri, and Vestri, north, south, east, and west, marking the first establishment of direction and stability in the universe. The sun, moon, and stars were set in the heavens, but they were not yet fixed. To explain their movements, the Norse imagined 2 great wolves, Skall and Hati, chasing the sun and moon endlessly across the sky. Their pursuit gave rise to the cycle of day and night, of seasons and time. Even here, in the earliest pages of myth, the seeds of doom were planted. For one day, the wolves would catch their prey, plunging the world into chaos at Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods. The gods were not yet finished with their shaping of the world. Walking along the shore, Odin, Vili, and Vi discovered 2 logs of driftwood, one of ash and the other of elm. From these lifeless pieces of wood, they crafted the first human beings. Odin gave them breath and life, Vili bestowed intelligence and movement, and Vi granted them speech, appearance, and the senses. They named the man Ask, from the ash tree, and the woman Embla, from the elm. Thus humanity entered the Norse cosmos, not as an afterthought, but as beings deliberately crafted by divine hands. Unlike many traditions where humans are born from clay or dust, here they are born from trees, deeply entwining their destiny with the natural world. With humans alive, the gods created a place for them to dwell, Midgard, the middle enclosure, to protect it from the chaotic giants that roamed beyond. They fashioned a mighty barrier out of Ymir's eyebrows, forming the wall that encircled Midgard and kept humanity safe. Above Midgard, high in the heavens, they built Asgard, the realm of the gods. Below lay Jotunheim, the land of the giants, untamed and dangerous. Still deeper stretched Niflheim and Muspelheim, remnants of the primordial chaos. And binding all these worlds together was Yggdrasil, the world tree. Its roots reached into every realm, its branches stretched into infinity, and its trunk stood as the axis of the universe. Upon its boughs and beneath its roots dwelled creatures of mystery. The wise eagle perched at its crown, the mischievous squirrel Ratatosk carrying messages of insult between eagle and serpent, and the dragon Nidhogg gnawing at its roots, waiting for the day the tree might weaken and collapse. This was the Norse cosmos, not a single, flat world, but a great web of 9 realms, each with its own mysteries and dangers. There was Asgard, home of the Aesir gods Odin, Thor, and their kin. There was Vanaheim, land of the Vanir deities, tied to fertility, prosperity, and the mysteries of the earth. Alfheim housed the radiant light elves, while Svartalfheim, or Nidavellir, was home to the dark elves and dwarves, master smiths who would craft weapons and treasures of unimaginable power. Jotunheim was the realm of the giants, ever hostile to the gods of Asgard. Midgard was humanity's home. Suspended between divine order and chaotic wilderness, Niflheim remained the cold realm of mists, while Muspelheim burned with unending fire. Finally, Hel, the land of the dead, stretched beneath the earth, ruled by the somber goddess Hel, daughter of Loki, to the Norse. This arrangement of worlds was not abstract philosophy, it was a living reality. Every storm, every sunrise, every flicker of the northern lights was seen as the working of divine forces within this grand design. When thunder rolled across the skies, it was Thor's hammer striking down giants. When the seas surged, it was the breath of Jormungandr, the world serpent encircling Midgard. Life was lived in the shadow of these myths, and every man and woman was a small but significant part of the unfolding cosmic drama. The Norse vision of creation is remarkable, not only for its imagery, but for its honesty. It did not promise perfection or eternal peace. Instead, it acknowledged a universe born in struggle, sustained by conflict, and destined for eventual destruction. Even as the gods forged order from Ymir's corpse, they knew the balance was temporary. The wolves still chased the sun. The dragons still gnawed the roots of Yggdrasil. The giants still plotted in their icy strongholds. From the very beginning, the cosmos carried within it the certainty of its own end. And yet, this was not a cause for despair. For the Norse, meaning was not found in escaping struggle but in facing it with courage. Their myths reminded them that life was fragile, fleeting, and often harsh but also glorious, filled with bravery, loyalty, and honor. To live well was to align oneself with the gods, to meet one's fate unflinching, even when doom was assured. It is this worldview, born in the cold winds of the north, that would shape an entire culture and leave behind myths so powerful. They still echo in our imaginations today. Thus, from the yawning void of Ginnungagap to the flourishing of life beneath Yggdrasil, the stage was set. The gods had created their world. Humanity had been born from the trees, and the 9 realms shimmered with life and danger. But this was only the beginning. Soon, the stories would turn from creation to conflict, from the birth of order to the battles that would define the destiny of gods and men alike. The Norse cosmos, vast and vibrant, was ready for its heroes and villains to step forward, ready for tales of wisdom, war, and wonder to unfold across its endless horizon. The world as the Norse imagined it did not begin with light or order, but with a chasm, an endless void called Ginnungagap. This was not a place of safety or form, it was a yawning nothingness, immeasurable in its scope, where no sun shone, no moon glowed, and no earth gave footing. On one side of the gap stretched Muspelheim, the realm of fire, a land of unbearable heat and constant flame, watched over by the fire giant Surtur. On the other side lay Niflheim, the realm of ice, fog and deathly cold, a place of endless glaciers and venomous rivers that froze as they flowed. For ages these realms remained apart, seething with their own primal energies. But in time, heat met cold in the middle of Ginnungagap, and something miraculous happened. Life stirred in the void. From the melting ice there emerged the first great being, a giant unlike any other, named Ymir. He was a frost giant, enormous, chaotic, and terrible in his power. Ymir was not born in the way mortals or even gods would later be born. He simply came into being, a child of frost and fire meeting in the empty dark. As he moved and breathed, more life began to form from his sweat and from the ice that clung to him. From under his left arm a man and a woman grew, and from his legs another son was born. The race of the Jotnar, the frost giants, had begun. Ymir was both father and mother to them, a monstrous progenitor whose very body spilled forth generations of giants destined to be both rivals and kin to the gods. Yet Ymir could not survive alone. From the frozen rime of Ginnungagap emerged another life form, one stranger and gentler, a great cow named Audhumla. She was vast, nourishing, her udders flowing with for rivers of milk that gave sustenance to Ymir and to all that came after. Audhumla herself fed not on grass or grain, for there were none, but on the salty blocks of ice that lined the chasm. As she licked and lit the frost, something began to take shape beneath her tongue. Slowly, over 3 days, the outline of a figure appeared, first hair, then a head, then the form of a man. This was Buri, the first of the gods. Buri stood tall and strong, radiant with power, a being wholly different from the chaotic and brutal frost giants. He had no mate until later, when from him came Bor, his son, and from Bor would come the first generation of true gods, Odin, Vili, and Ve. These 3 brothers, born of divine lineage yet surrounded by giants, soon became the architects of all that is known. They looked upon Ymir, the ancient giant, and saw in him both a threat and an opportunity. Ymir was immense and uncontrollable, his children multiplying and spreading. To the gods, the frost giant represented the chaos that threatened all order, the unshaped mass that must be carved into meaning. So the 3 brothers rose up against Ymir, and in a battle that shook Ginnungagap, they struck him down. Odin wielded the mightiest hand, but together the brothers slew the giant, spilling his blood in a flood so great it drowned nearly all of the other frost giants. Only a few escaped, among them a giant named Bergelmir and his wife, who fled on a boat made from a hollowed-out tree trunk, carrying forward the line of giants that would forever war with the gods. With Ymir dead, the brothers set about shaping the world from his body. They dragged him into the center of Ginnungagap and began their work. From his flesh they made the earth itself, firm and solid beneath the feet of mortals and gods alike. From his blood they made the seas, the rivers, and all the waters that surround the land. His bones became mountains, jagged and immovable, thrusting up from the ground. His teeth and jawbones they scattered into stones and pebbles, littering the earth. From his skull they formed the sky, arching it over the land like a great dome. To hold it aloft, they set for dwarves at its corners Austri in the east, Vestri in the west, Nordri in the north, and Sudri in the south. His brains they flung into the air, and there they became the drifting clouds. Even the sparks from Muspelheim they gathered and set into the heavens as stars, so the night would not be empty. The sun and the moon were placed on their courses, forever pulled by divine steeds across the sky. From Ymir's corpse, then, the 9 realms took shape. At the center was Midgard, the world of men, encircled by a vast sea, and guarded by a wall made of Ymir's eyebrows to keep out the giants. Above Midgard lay Asgard, the shining realm of the gods, linked by the rainbow bridge Bifrost. Beneath the earth and reaching downward into mystery was Niflheim, cold and desolate, while far away burned Muspelheim with its flames. There were realms for elves, light and dark, for dwarves in their stone halls, and even Jotunheim, where the giants endured. This was the cosmos, a tapestry of realms spun from the remains of chaos itself. But the shaping of the world was not yet complete. As the brothers walked along the new shores of Midgard, they found 2 logs lying upon the sand. They were shapeless, lifeless pieces of driftwood, washed up by the sea. The 3 gods looked upon them and saw potential. Odin breathed into them the gift of life and spirit. Vili gave them intelligence and movement, the power to think and to act. Vi bestowed upon them form, speech, and the senses to see, hear, and feel. From these 2 logs rose the first man and the first woman, Askenembla. They stood naked on the shore, but alive, aware, and imbued with divine gifts. From them the race of humanity would descend, to live and struggle in Midgard, ever caught between the forces of gods and giants. In these stories, one sees not merely the invention of myths, but a reflection of how the Norse viewed the balance of the universe. The world was not born from serenity or harmony, but from struggle, violence, and the carving of order out of chaos. Creation required destruction. The gods themselves came into being by overthrowing the primordial, and from the body of their slain ancestor they forged the very ground they walked upon. This was no gentle genesis, no quiet word bringing forth light. It was a cosmos written in blood, bone, and fire. And yet from that harshness came beauty, forests and seas, stars and sun, men and women who could look up at the heavens and wonder at the gods who had shaped them. Still, the Norse did not forget that from Ymir's blood the flood had spared a remnant of giants. Those few survivors bore children and grandchildren, and from them came the eternal enemies of the gods. Jotunheim remained a realm of strength, where frost and stone-born beings waited to challenge the order the gods had established. The world, then, was never safe or permanent. It was always under threat of collapse back into the chaos from which it was born. The very act of creation set into motion an endless conflict, for the kin of Ymir had every reason to hate the gods who killed their ancestor. Thus, the stage was set for all the myths that would follow, a cosmos fragile and contested, where the line between stability and destruction was as thin as the edge of a sword. The creation myth, preserved in the old Eddas, was more than a story. It was a worldview. It told every Norse listener that the universe they lived in was not secure, that it was born from battle and destined for battle again. The giants and gods would never be reconciled, and humanity, fragile and brief-lived, would dwell in the middle, relying on walls of bone and brows to shield them. It was a reminder that life itself was a gift carved from chaos, sustained only by vigilance, courage, and the willingness to struggle. The first man and woman had been shaped from driftwood ordinary, discarded material transformed by divine breath. So too were mortals, humble, fleeting, yet given worth by the gifts of the gods. As the sagas tell it, the brothers Odin, Vili, and Vi stood looking upon the world they had made. The seas they had poured, the mountains they had raised. They knew their task was not finished, for life itself had only begun. But in their actions was the seed of everything to come, the struggles of gods and giants, the trials of men, and the fate of the cosmos itself. For even as the stars wheeled overhead, set in their courses from the sparks of Muspelheim, a shadow lingered. All things made from destruction would in time return to destruction. This truth, unspoken but ever present, lay at the heart of Norse myth. And though Odin and his brothers had carved the 9 realms from the corpse of Ymir, they could not escape the destiny that in time all would burn and all would end. The Norse vision of the universe begins not with order, but with an abyss, before there was earth, or sea, or sky, before even the stars had been kindled. There stretched only a great yawning emptiness known as Ginnungagap. This was not an ordinary void. It was a chasm so vast, so immeasurable, that even the gods who later spoke of it could only describe it as a gulf of silence and potential. Yet on either side of this endless gap there already existed two primal forces. To the north lay Niflheim, a land of mist, frost, and eternal ice, where rivers froze in their beds, and the very air seemed heavy with stillness. To the south lay Muspelheim, a realm of fire, glowing with heat and sparks, guarded by the fire giant Surtur, whose sword blazed like the heart of a star. It was at the meeting of these two extremes, cold and heat, that creation stirred. From the icy rivers of Niflheim came venom and rime, drifting into Ginnungagap, where the warm winds of Muspelheim melted them into droplets. Out of this strange mingling, life emerged in its first form. The frost began to shape itself into a figure, and soon the being known as Ymir came into existence. Ymir was no god, but a giant, the first of the Jetnir, a race that would forever remain both kin and enemy to the gods. His body was vast, immense, as though the void itself had condensed into flesh. But Ymir was not alone for long. From the same elemental fusion came Alhumla, a great cow whose milk flowed endlessly. Sustaining Ymir, she, too, had her purpose. For as she licked the salty blocks of ice that lined Ginnungagap, her tongue revealed the shape of another being. Hidden within the frozen mass, over 3 days of licking, the ice gave way to a Mantal, strong and noble. This was Buri, who would become the ancestor of the gods. Ymir, meanwhile, was far from dormant. As he slept, strange new life sprang. From his form, from the sweat beneath his arms, grew a man and a woman, while from one of his legs came a 6-headed son. These were the first of the giants, a wild race destined to multiply and challenge all that came after them. In Ymir, then, we see both the father of life and the seed of chaos. His very being produced both creation and disorder, a truth that foreshadows the fate of the cosmos itself. From Buri came his son Bor, who took Bestla, a giantess, as his wife. Their union gave birth to 3 sons who would change the course of existence: Odin, Vili, and Ve. These brothers, inheritors of both divine and giant blood, looked upon Ymir and saw that his vast body was both a threat and a resource. Knowing that the world could not take shape while this primordial giant still walked the void, they attacked him. After a great struggle, they slew him, and from his massive corpse the world itself was fashioned. This act of violence was not an ending, but a transformation. The brothers dragged Ymir's body into the empty gulf and set about their work. His flesh they spread to form the land. His bones they raised into mountains. His teeth and shattered bones they scattered as stones. From his blood flowed rivers, seas, and oceans so vast that they drowned nearly all the giants, leaving only a few survivors to flee into distant realms. His skull they lifted and placed above, making it the dome of the sky, supported by 4 dwarves named Nori, Suri, Austri, and Vestri north, south, east, and west. His brains they scattered across the heavens, where they became the drifting clouds. Even his eyebrows were used, curved into an enclosure that became Midgard, the realm of humankind, offering a measure of safety against the giants who lurked beyond. The shaping of the cosmos did not stop with land and sky. From Muspelheim's sparks, the gods crafted the stars and set them across the heavens, filling the darkness with light. They captured 2 of these sparks, brighter than the rest, and fashioned them into the sun and the moon to guide them through the sky. The gods chose 2 beings, Sol, the shining sun maiden, and her brother Mani, who steered the moon. Yet, their journeys were not peaceful. From the first day they began their courses. They were pursued by wolves, Skull chasing Sol, Hati chasing Mani. And so, in the Norse sky, the passing of day and night is not a tranquil procession, but a desperate flight, as the sun and moon flee endlessly from the jaws of their hunters. Once the heavens were set in place, the gods created Asgard, their own realm, high above Midgard. They laid the rainbow bridge, Bifrost, as a shimmering link between the 2 worlds, guarded always by Heimdall, the watchman with eyes that could see across great distances and ears that could hear the grass growing on the ground. Beyond Midgard and Asgard stretched the other realms, Jotunheim, the land of the giants, Elfheim, the land of the light elves, Svartalfheim, the home of the dark elves or dwarves, Vanaheim, dwelling of the Vanir gods, Niflhel, the realm of the dead, and Muspelheim, the land of fire. Together these realms were woven into the branches and roots of Yggdrasil, the great world tree, whose existence tied all of creation together. Yet still, there were no humans. That, too, would change. One day Odin, Vili, and Vi came upon 2 logs of wood lying upon the shore. The brothers paused, seeing in the rough grain of the timber a potential waiting to be awakened. Taking up the first log, Odin breathed into it the gift of life and spirit. Vili added intelligence and motion. Vi gave it senses, speech, and appearance. From these gifts arose the first man and woman, whom they named Ask and Embla. They became the ancestors of all humankind, destined to live within Midgard, protected but also bound by its walls. It is worth pausing to reflect on the nature of this creation. Unlike other traditions, where the world may be born from a god's word or thought, here existence emerges through conflict, transformation, and sacrifice. The Norse universe begins, not in peace, but in struggle. Its order is carved from the body of chaos itself, and its very foundations remind us that destruction and creation are inseparable. The gods are not omnipotent beings who conjure life effortlessly. They are craftsmen who mold, shape, and sacrifice to bring form to the void. And even in their triumph, there is no guarantee of permanence, for the survival of Midgard depends on vigilance against the ever-threatening giants and the wolves, who chase the sun and moon. This vision of existence is deeply tied to the Norse sense of fate. The gods themselves are bound by the same cycle that gave them power. Just as Ymir fell, so too will Odin, Thor, and the rest of the Aesir. Just as Midgard was shaped from blood and bone, so too will it end in fire and ruin. To the Norse, nothing was eternal, not even their gods. Yet this fragility did not lead them to despair. Instead, it infused their worldview with urgency. Life was precious precisely because it was fleeting, because it was carved from the brink of nothingness. Every feast, every song, every act of bravery or loyalty was a defiance of the void. A moment of meaning rested from the abyss. When they looked up at the stars, the Norse did not see only light and beauty. They saw sparks from a fiery realm scattered across the heavens, and they knew that those sparks could be consumed one day. When they felt the earth beneath their feet, they stood upon the flesh of a slain giant. and they knew that the ground itself bore the memory of violence. Even the protective walls of Midgard, shaped from Ymir's brows, reminded them that safety was only temporary. Chaos pressed in from all sides. Yet in this struggle, the Norse also found resilience. The world, though fragile, had been shaped with purpose. Humanity, though vulnerable, had been given life directly by the gods. And while giants and wolves threatened to undo creation, each new dawn, each rising of the sun despite Skal's pursuit, was proof that order could hold a little longer. Thus the creation story is not simply an origin myth. It is a lens through which the Norse understood every part of their lives. Their world was not given freely. It was built from sacrifice, wrestled into existence, and maintained by constant vigilance. They knew that death was inevitable, but they also knew that from death could come new beginnings. Just as from Ymir's corpse the world itself had bloomed. In time, this cosmic vision would shape not only their stories of gods and monsters, but their understanding of heroism and fate. When a warrior stood on the battlefield, he did not imagine himself immortal. Instead, he saw himself as part of the same cycle, born from struggle, destined to die, yet able in his brief span to carve meaning from chaos, just as the gods had done in the beginning. And so, in the silence after creation, the stage was set. The world tree stretched its branches over the 9 realms. The sun and moon fled their hunters across the sky. Humanity walked upon the earth, shaped from a slain giant, and the gods, dwelling in Asgard, watched and prepared, knowing that though they had carved order from the void, their work would never be finished. Creation was not a single event, it was a struggle that would continue for all time. Under the cold skies of the north, where winter seems eternal and the land is carved by fjords, glaciers, and endless seas, the Norse people shaped not only their daily lives, but also their imagination into stories of gods, giants, and unseen forces. By the time we reach this part of their mythology, we begin to feel a shift. We move from the creation of the world and the raw battles of giants and gods into the shaping of divine order, where law, fate, and cosmic roles begin to take their place. Chapter 4 is where the myths settle into their rhythm, introducing us to the great figures of Asgard, their bonds, rivalries, and the fragile structure that held the 9 worlds together. This is the era of the Aesir gods in their prime, and the stories here blend grandeur with foreshadowing, showing us that even in the height of their power, the gods were already walking toward their fate. The heart of this chapter begins with Odin. More than just a chief of gods, Odin was a seeker, a wanderer cloaked in wisdom and secrecy. Unlike Zeus of the Greeks, who ruled with thunder and decree, Odin was shaped by sacrifice and relentless hunger for knowledge. His stories are not about effortless dominion, but about what one must give up to truly understand the threads of destiny. We are told he gave one of his eyes to drink from Ymir's well, the fountain of wisdom hidden deep beneath Yggdrasil. That image, a god forever walking with only one eye, not because of weakness, but because of deliberate loss, tells us everything about the Norse view of power. Knowledge was not free. Every answer demanded a cost. Even greater was Odin's sacrifice upon Yggdrasil itself. In one of the most haunting images in myth, Odin hanged himself upon the world tree for 9 days and nights, pierced by his own spear, fasting and suffering, until the runes revealed themselves to him. He was a god who endured death like torment, not for glory, but for symbols of power and magic that he could bring back to the world of men and gods alike. This act echoes the mysteries of shamanic initiation, where death is embraced so that rebirth and wisdom may follow. It also reminds us of the strange and somber reality at the center of Norse belief. Even the gods were not exempt from suffering or fate. Alongside Odin, we meet Thor, perhaps the most beloved of all the Norse gods. Where Odin was enigmatic, Thor was straightforward protector, warrior, defender of both Asgard and Midgard. His weapon, Mjolnir, was more than just a hammer. It was the very embodiment of order beating back chaos. He crushed giants, slayed serpents, and roared across the skies in his thunder chariot, pulled by goats. Unlike Odin, who dealt in riddles and secret bargains, their strength was plain, his loyalty unshaken. Yet even Thor was not without complexity. His reliance on sheer force reflected a deeper truth of Norse life, the struggle to hold back a world that always threatened to break through. He was not invincible. His final doom lay waiting in the coils of Jormungandr, the world serpent. And yet, for the moment, he stood as the unyielding shield of the cosmos. But the pantheon was not merely about warriors and rulers. We encounter Freya, goddess of love, beauty, fertility, and also of magic. She presided over realms of desire and passion, yet she also guided the practice of cider, a form of sorcery tied to fate and weaving the unseen. Her presence shows us the balance of the divine feminine in Norse cosmology: desire and destruction, fertility and war, love and death intertwined. For in many tales, Freya received half of those who died in battle, her Hallfolkvangr rivaling Odin's Valhalla. To die bravely was not only Odin's gift to claim. Freya herself stood as a chooser of the slain. Her brother Freyr symbolized another aspect of life equally vital to the Norse worldview: fertility, peace, and prosperity. Unlike Thor's hammer or Odin's spear, Freyr's symbols were tied to agriculture, kingship, and the cycles of growth and harvest. In a land of long winters and brief summers, Freyr's blessings were more than ceremonial. They were lifelines. His myths remind us that strength was not only measured in war, but also in the ability to ensure survival, peace, and the continuity of life. Yet as much as these gods stood in harmony, Norse mythology thrived on tension. Nowhere was this clearer than in Loki, trickster, shapeshifter, mischief maker, and ultimately betrayer. Loki embodied the chaos that even the gods themselves could not tame. He was not evil in the beginning. In fact, he was Odin's blood brother, welcomed into Asgard and often aiding the gods with his cunning. Without Loki, Thor would not have received Mjolnir, and many treasures of the gods would never have come into existence. But his mischief carried a dangerous edge, and over time it turned darker, more destructive, culminating in betrayal that would lead to Ragnarok. Loki reveals to us the Norse awareness of instability that even at the height of glory, decay, and disruption were already woven into the design. The Aesir did not exist in isolation. They had their rivals, the Vanir. The two tribes of gods represent one of the central mysteries of Norse religion, the fusion of warlike and fertile forces. The myths tell us of a war between the Aesir and the Vanir, a conflict so fierce that it threatened the order of the cosmos itself. And yet, unlike other mythologies where such wars end in annihilation, here we see something rare: the gods make peace. They exchange hostages, and from this mingling a new balance emerges. The story reflects the historical blending of cultures, the fusion of different tribes and traditions in Scandinavia, and also suggests that Norse religion itself was not rigid but adaptive, absorbing new layers as time passed. In these tales, we also glimpse the role of fate, an unyielding force even greater than the gods themselves. The Norns, mysterious weavers of destiny, sat beneath Yggdrasil at the well, averred, carving into the tree the fate of all beings, human and divine alike. Even Odin, for all his sacrifices and wisdom, could not escape their decrees. Here lies one of the most haunting features of Norse belief: the acceptance that no power, not even that of the gods, could alter the final outcome. The end was already written, and yet life had to be lived with courage and defiance in the face of it. As the stories of this chapter unfold, we begin to see how the 9 worlds were bound together not merely by geography, but by the delicate balance of relationships, rivalries, and inevitable fate. The gods of Asgard, for all their might, walked a narrow path. Their victories over the giants were never permanent. Their feasts and celebrations, though grand, were shadows against a horizon they knew would one day darken. And yet, there is beauty in this fragility. The Norse myths do not celebrate eternal perfection, but rather the courage to live, to fight, to love, and to sacrifice in a world where nothing lasts forever. Odin's missing eye, Thor's destined battle, Freyja's mourning, and Loki's betrayal, all of these weave together to create a mythology where glory and doom coexist. In this chapter, the Norse gods emerge not as distant, flawless deities, but as figures alive, with human struggles magnified to divine scale. They remind us that even in their strength, they were bound by the same currents that pull at us all time: love, loss, fate. And as we leave the world of Asgard for now, the stage is set for the deeper dramas yet to come, betrayals that will wound the gods, prophecies that will haunt them, and the shadow of an ending that no wisdom, strength, or magic could ever fully prevent. Beneath the roots of Yggdrasil, where the great tree touches shadow and silence, lies a realm so haunting that even the bravest of warriors dared not whisper its name too often. This is how the underworld of the Norse, Chapter 5, draws us downward, away from the gleaming halls of Asgard and the storm-tossed bravery of Midgard, into a place that reflects the deepest fears and realities of life in the North, the inevitability of death, the mysteries of the afterlife, and the unsettling knowledge that not every soul was destined for Odin's feast hall of Valhalla. Here, in the chill of hell, we find not only sorrow, but also a raw truth about how the Norse understood existence itself. When most people today think of the Viking afterlife, they imagine Valhalla, a golden hall of endless battle and feasting, where the bravest warriors drank mead from curved horns, waiting for the final summons to Ragnarok. This vision is powerful, but it is not the full picture. Valhalla was a destination for the chosen few, the warriors who died gloriously in battle, their bodies falling beneath sword or spear. But for the vast majority of men, women, children, and elders, death did not open the doors of Odin's hall. Instead, it led them elsewhere, to Hel, the shadowed domain ruled by a goddess who bore the same name. Hel, the being, is one of the most striking figures in all mythology. Daughter of Loki and the giantess Angrboda, she was born alongside two other monstrous siblings, the wolf Fenrir and the serpent Jörmungandr. While her brothers were cast out into chains and oceans, Hel was given dominion over those who did not die in battle. She was half living, half dead, her body described as beautiful and pale on one side, yet rotting and corpse-like on the other. This duality embodied her role. She was both caretaker and gaoler, both the necessary guide of souls and the dreadful reminder of decay. Her realm was no paradise, nor was it a fiery pit of torment like the Christian hell that later reshaped our perceptions. Instead, it was a cold, misty, and shadowed place, a land of stillness beneath one of Yggdrasil's roots. There, the dead dwelled in quiet, without the glory of endless battle or the torment of eternal flames. They lingered, waiting, watched over by Hel and her servants. To the Norse, this was neither reward nor punishment. It was simply the natural state of death for those who did not die as warriors. The descriptions of Hel's domain are eerie and symbolic. We hear of her hall called Eldjidnir, its name meaning damp with rain. Her dish was called hunger, her knife famine, her bed was named sick bed, and her threshold was stumbling block. Every aspect of her world reflected the harsh realities of life in the North: hunger, illness, hardship, and the quiet descent into the grave. This was not fantasy, it was life projected into myth. For the Norse people, who lived with famine, disease, and long winters. These symbols were not abstract, they were their lived reality, embodied in the halls of hell. Yet the underworld was not a place of despair alone, it was also necessary. Just as Yggdrasil's roots reached into all realms, the Norse cosmology required balance. If Valhalla represented glory, Hell represented the common truth. The goddess Hel herself, though feared, was not purely malevolent. She was a ruler who kept the dead in their place, ensuring the order of the cosmos. Without her, the dead might wander untethered. With her, the balance of life and death remained intact. But the presence of Hel in the myths also reminds us of how fate permeates every layer of Norse belief. The dead were not judged by morality, as in other traditions, but by circumstance. A child who died of illness, a woman who passed from age, a farmer who succumbed to winter's vital were destined for Hel's domain, not because they lacked virtue, but because their deaths were not the deaths of warriors. This speaks to a worldview shaped by the brutal realities of survival. Death was not always glorious. Often it was slow, bitter, and unheroic, and the mythology reflected that with honesty. Yet even within this bleakness, Hel's realm played a pivotal role in the greater story of Norse mythology. It was from her domain that the final forces of Ragnarok would be summoned. When the twilight of the gods arrived, Hel's dead would march to the battlefield, swelling the ranks of chaos. Thus, Hel was not only the custodian of the dead, she was also a keeper of fate, holding within her halls the soldiers of destiny. To truly understand the Norse conception of death, we must also return to the Norns, the weavers of fate beneath Yggdrasil. The afterlife in Norse myth was not about reward or punishment, but about alignment with one's destiny. The Norns spun the thread of every life, and when it was cut, the path of the soul was fixed. If that path led to the clash of swords, Valhalla waited. If it led to age, illness, or misfortune, then Hel's cold embrace was inevitable. In this, we see how deeply the Norse accepted fate as absolute. No pleading, no prayer, no sacrifice could alter where the soul would go. This vision of the afterlife also highlights the communal nature of Norse belief. Valhalla was not a solitary paradise, it was a hall filled with warriors training together for the final battle. Likewise, Hel's domain was not isolation, it was a realm where the dead lingered together, bound by the shared reality of their mortality. In both places, death did not erase community. The soul did not vanish. Instead, it continued, in feasting or in shadow, woven into the fabric of the 9 worlds. We can also sense echoes of older traditions in these myths. Archaeological evidence suggests that the Norse and their ancestors buried their dead with grave goods, swords, jewelry, food, ships, preparations for a journey beyond. This practice reveals that they imagined death not as an ending, but as a passage. Hel's realm, with its hall and furnishings, mirrors this view. Death was a continuation, another state of being, where the necessities of life still mattered. At times, the boundaries between the living and the dead could blur. Tales tell of Draugr, restless corpses that could rise from their graves, animated with unnatural strength. These beings haunted the living, symbols of the dangers of disrupting the balance of death. Only with rituals, proper burials, and respect for the dead could such disturbances be prevented. Again, Hel's role emerges. She was not only ruler, but protector, keeping the boundary intact between the living and the departed. The myths of Hel are not as numerous as those of Odin or Thor, but their weight is profound. They remind us of the universality of death, the inevitability of endings, and the stark realism of Norse culture. For a people who faced long winters, sudden raids, and fragile survival, these stories were not meant to comfort with visions of eternal bliss. Instead, they gave shape to reality, accepting it, and finding meaning in living bravely despite it. And perhaps that is the most striking lesson of all. The Norse afterlife was not about clinging to eternal joy, but about preparing for the inevitability of death with courage, whether one feasted in Valhalla or lingered in hell's misty halls. The fact remained, fate ruled all, and the only choice was to live boldly while life remained. As we linger in the cold silence of hell's realm, we sense the contrast with what came before. The glory of Asgard, the thunder of Thor, the wisdom of Odin, all of it is balanced by this place of stillness, life and death, light and shadow, glory and decay. These were not opposites to the Norse. They were partners, woven together, inseparable. From the shadowed underworld, our journey through the myths begins to curve upward again, toward new challenges and new betrayals. For even as hell kept her watch over the dead, events in Asgard and Midgard would unravel, driven by trickery, grief, and fate. Ahead lies one of the most tragic and fateful stories in all of Norse mythology, the death of Baldr, the shining god, whose fall would mark the beginning of the end. Baldr was the Shining One, in the crowded tapestry of Norse mythology filled with warriors drenched in blood, gods wielding thunder, giants roaring across mountains, and shadows whispering beneath Yggdrasil. Baldr stood apart. He was light itself, a figure so pure, so radiant, that his very presence softened the hearts of gods and men alike. His skin was described as so luminous that it seemed to glow. His words carried truth and peace. His presence dispelled sorrow. He was the beloved of Asgard, not because he fought or conquered, but because he embodied what the others could not, innocence and harmony in a world fated for doom. Yet as the Norse knew all too well, light can never exist without shadow. And so, in one of the most tragic stories of the mythology, Baldr's very brightness drew darkness to him. His death would become the first great crack in the foundations of the gods, a sorrow so deep that even Odin himself could not heal it. It was not just the fall of a god, it was the foretelling of Ragnarok. The story begins with dreams. Baldr, the Radiant, began to be haunted by visions of his own death. Night after night he saw shadows creeping toward him, saw himself falling lifeless, saw sorrow covering the halls of Asgard like mist. To the Norse, dreams were not idle imaginings. They were omens, woven threads from the Norns themselves, whispering what fate had already decreed. When Baldr shared his dreams with the gods, Asgard trembled. For if even the Shining One, the beloved of all, could fall, then what safety was left in the nine worlds? Frigg, Baldr's mother, moved with desperation. She was not only Odin's wife, but the protector of family, of kinship, of the bonds that held the worlds together. She swore she would not let fate claim her son without a fight. So she set out across the worlds, traveling to every being, every creature, every element of existence, from fire to water, from iron to stone, from beasts of the forest to blades. Of grass in the meadows she demanded oaths that none would harm her son, and they all swore. Bound by her maternal grief, nothing in existence, she believed, could now touch Baldr. And so, for a time, Asgard rejoiced. The gods, relieved even, made sport of Baldr's invulnerability. They gathered in the great halls and fields, hurling spears, swinging axes, throwing stones, firing arrows, all of which bounced harmlessly from Baldr's glowing body. Laughter filled the air. What had been a prophecy of doom became a game of immortality. Baldr stood, smiling, as the center of it all, proof that fate could be outwitted, that even the Norns' threads could be rewoven. But fate does not yield so easily, for Frigg, in her haste, had overlooked one small thing. When she came to the plant mistletoe, it seemed so young, so fragile, so harmless that she did not bother to extract an oath from it. What threat, she thought, could a tiny sprig of green offer to the shining god? That omission would become the crack through which death entered. Loki was watching. He always watched. The trickster, the shapeshifter, the one who walked between chaos and kinship, could never ignore such a scene. To him, the gods' laughter was not joy, it was arrogance. Their games, their mocking of fate, their belief that they could outwit destiny, it was hubris, and hubris demanded an answer. Slipping into disguise as an old woman, Loki approached Frigg and inquired about the oaths she had gathered. Frigg, perhaps still relieved, admitted her oversight. The mistletoe, small and young, had not been bound by oath. Loki's mind sparked. In that instant, the tragedy of Baldr was sealed. He went into the forest, seeking the mistletoe, and cut a sprig. In his hands it became more than a plant. It became a dart, a slender weapon of fate, sharpened not by metal, but by inevitability. He returned to the hall where the gods were still laughing and playing their game. Among them stood Hyr, Baldr's blind brother, left out of the sport because he could not see where to aim. Loki, ever manipulative, approached him with feigned kindness. He offered the dart of mistletoe and guided his hand. "Why should you not also honor your brother?" he whispered. "I will guide your aim." And so, with Loki's direction, Hyr cast the mistletoe dart. It struck Baldr, piercing him where no weapon ever had. The shining god staggered, his glow dimming, his body collapsing. Silence fell across Asgard. Where laughter had filled the air, now there was only horror. Baldr lay dead. The grief that followed was unlike anything the gods had ever known. Odin, who had endured war and sacrifice, wept openly. Frigg's cries echoed across the worlds. The gods stood in disbelief, as if the very fabric of reality had torn. For Baldr was not only beloved, he was hope itself. His death was more than the loss of a son, a brother, a husband. It was the death of innocence, the proof that fate could not be escaped, that even the purest light could be extinguished. Yet even in their grief, the gods sought remedy. They would not accept this fate without struggle. Odin, desperate, sent Ymir, another of his sons, to ride to Hel's realm, mounted on Sleipnir, Odin's 8-legged steed. Ymir crossed the boundaries of the living and descended into the underworld. There, in the misty halls of Hel, he found Baldr, sitting pale and silent among the dead. Hel herself, ruler of the underworld, listened as Ymir begged for Baldr's release. She considered, and at last made an offer. Baldr would be returned to the living if every single being in existence, living or dead, shed a tear for him. Only such universal grief could compel her to release him. And so messengers were sent across the worlds. Gods and giants, men and beasts, stones and trees all wept for Baldr. Their tears fell like rain, for truly none could deny their sorrow. It seemed that Hel's condition would be met, and that Baldr would rise again. But then, as always, Loki intervened, disguised as an old jaundice named KKK. He alone refused to weep. "Let Hel hold what she has," he declared coldly. With that refusal, the bargain was broken. Baldr remained in the realm of the dead. Hope was extinguished. Baldr's death carried consequences far beyond sorrow. The gods punished Hyr, manipulated into becoming his brother's killer, but they knew the true architect was Loki. The bonds of kinship between Loki and the other gods, already fraying, began to snap. His betrayal at Baldr's death was the beginning of his downfall, the path that would lead to his binding and, eventually, his role in Ragnarok. And so the gods prepared for the future, knowing now with certainty that fate could not be avoided. For Baldr's death was more than personal tragedy, it was prophecy fulfilled. The Norns had woven the thread long ago. The shining god would fall, and with him, the end would begin. What makes this story so striking is not just the events themselves, but the themes they reveal about the Norse worldview. Unlike many mythologies, where the gods reign supreme and untouchable, the Norse gods are vulnerable. They are not outside of fate, they are bound by it. Odin himself, the All-Father, cannot alter destiny. Frigg, with all her love, cannot protect her son. Their grief is human, their power limited, their doom unavoidable. The death of Baldr also reveals the Norse acceptance of impermanence. Even the most beautiful, the most pure, cannot last. Light fades, innocence is lost. Joy gives way to sorrow. These were not abstract ideas, but truths the Norse lived with daily through harsh winters. Sudden violence, fleeting harvests. To them, Baldr's death was not simply myth, it was life, told through divine figures. Yet there is a thread of hope woven into this tragedy, for some versions of the myth suggest that after Ragnarok, when the world is remade, Baldr will return from Hell's realm. In the new world, green and reborn, he will shine again. This promise does not erase the sorrow of his death, but it plants a seed that even in destruction, there is renewal. As the halls of Asgard echo with grief, the story of the gods bends irrevocably toward its twilight. The bonds between gods and Loki are shattered. The inevitability of Ragnarok grows closer, and from the shadows of hell, the dead wait for their time to rise. The world of the Norse myths is one of cycles: life and death, loss and renewal, doom and rebirth. The death of Baldr marks the pivot point, the moment when the shadows begin to overtake the light. From here on, every tale carries the weight of that loss, the knowledge that the end is coming. And so, with Baldr's body laid upon his ship, flames rising as he was sent to sea, the gods watched the light of his funeral pyre vanish into the horizon. Their hearts were heavy. Their world, changed forever. The Shining One was gone. The laughter of Asgard was silenced, and in the silence, the echo of doom began to grow louder. From this sorrow, the myths moved toward anger, toward betrayal, toward vengeance. For Loki's role in the tragedy cannot go unanswered. Ahead lies his binding, the moment when the trickster is finally captured, chained beneath the earth, his venomous punishment as terrible as the grief he caused. The gods had endured Loki's tricks for too long, time and time again. He had brought chaos into their halls, sometimes with laughter, sometimes with disaster, but always with a restlessness that never seemed to end. He was the shapeshifter, the sly one, the whisperer of lies and half-truths. Yet for all his mischief, the gods had tolerated him, even relied upon him, because he had been useful. His cunning had helped them more than once. He had rescued Thor's stolen hammer, outwitted giants, and crafted clever solutions when brute strength could not prevail. But Loki had crossed a line that could never be undone. The moment it happened, the whole of Asgard felt it. Baldr, the shining god, the most beloved of them all, lay dead. The story of how this tragedy unfolded had already spread like wildfire. How Frigg, Baldr's mother, had extracted oaths from every living and lifeless thing in the world never to harm her son. Every tree, every stone, every animal, every disease save for one overlooked thing, the mistletoe. How Loki, discovering this omission, fashioned a dart of mistletoe and placed it into the hands of Ymir, Baldr's blind brother. And how, in the cruelest jest of all, he guided his aim, sending the dart straight into Baldr's chest during a game, striking him dead before the eyes of gods and men. Baldr's death was no ordinary passing. He was not simply another god, nor just one among many. Baldr was the embodiment of light, joy, and beauty in a cosmos often weighed down by shadows. His death was a wound in the very fabric of creation. The gods mourned, the earth itself trembled, and in every corner of the 9 realms, beings whispered that this was the beginning of the end. The Aesir knew whom to blame. Loki had not merely killed a god, he had slain hope itself. His laughter at the moment of Baldr's fall, his smirk as chaos took root, burned into the memory of every god who had stood in the assembly that day. They swore vengeance. Loki, of course, fled. He knew what was coming. He ran far from Asgard, far from the gaze of Odin's ravens, far from Thor's wrath. The trickster hid in the mountains, building for himself a secret house with 4 doors, each facing a different direction, so he could see his enemies coming no matter where they approached from. By day he took the shape of a salmon leaping in the cold rivers to hide from pursuit. By night he returned to his house, ever scheming, ever shifting, never still. But the gods did not forget, and they did not relent. They hunted him across the worlds, guided by prophecy, guided by wrath. One day, as Loki lounged in his hiding place, he sat weaving a net. Perhaps he intended to use it for fishing in the streams. Perhaps it was merely another idle creation. But when Odin, watching from his high seat in Asgard, spotted him, he understood what Loki was doing and whispered word of it to the other gods. At once, Thor and the others set out. When Loki saw them approach, he knew his time had come. He cast the net into the fire, hoping to destroy the evidence of his craft, and fled back to the river, taking the form of a salmon once more. But the gods were clever too. Seeing the ashes of the net in the fire, they realized what Loki had been doing and quickly fashioned their own from the remains. With this, they went to the river and cast it wide. Loki darted and twisted in the water, swimming with all the speed and desperation of one who knows his fate is closing in. Twice he escaped their net, wriggling free. But the 3rd time, Thor stood ready. He reached into the water, and with a mighty grip, he caught Loki by the tail. The salmon squirmed and writhed, but Thor's hand was iron. From that day on it is said, salmon have narrow tails, pinched from Thor's grasp, dragged from the water. Loki resumed his true form. He struggled, cursed, laughed even, but it was no use. The gods had him. His mocking eyes, however, still gleamed with defiance, as if daring them to do their worst. And so they did. The gods had no ordinary punishment in mind. They would make of Loki a living symbol, a warning, and a prisoner until the very end of days. They dragged him deep into the earth, to a cavern far from the light of sun or moon. There, they laid upon him a sentence more dreadful than any mortal could imagine. First, they seized Loki's sons by Sigyn, his faithful wife. 2 of the boys, Vali and Narfi, were brought before him. In their cruel justice, the gods transformed Vali into a wolf, and the beast turned upon his brother, tearing Narfi apart. From Narfi's entrails, the gods fashioned unbreakable chains. With these gruesome bonds, they bound Loki to 3 great stones, one at his shoulders, one at his loins, one at his knees, pinning him against the unyielding rock. But this was not the end of his torment. Above his head, the goddess Skawi fastened a serpent, and from its fangs dripped venom, burning and caustic. The drops fell upon Loki's face, sizzling his skin, searing his flesh with endless agony. His body convulsed with every touch of poison, his screams echoing through the darkness of the cavern. And yet, he was not utterly forsaken. Sigyn, his wife, refused to leave him. She knelt by his side, holding a bowl above his face to catch the venom. For long hours, she stayed, her arms aching, her body weary, but her love unbroken. Whenever the bowl grew full, she rose to empty it, and in that brief moment, venom struck her husband again. Loki writhed and howled so violently that the earth above shuddered and split. Mortals who felt these tremors called them earthquakes, never knowing that what shook their world was the anguish of a bound god deep below. So Loki remained, chained in darkness, writhing between torment and brief reprieve, awaiting the day when his bonds would at last break, for the seers had foretold it. At Ragnarök, the end of all things, Loki would be freed, and he would march with the enemies of the gods against Asgard itself. But until that day, he lay in shadow, tasting bitterness, dreaming of vengeance. The image of Loki bound in the cavern is more than a myth. It is a mirror of human fears and truths. It speaks to the punishment of betrayal, the inescapability of justice, the persistence of suffering. It is the story of a god who embodied the shadow in every heart, the side of chaos that both creates and destroys. Loki was never merely a villain. He was the necessary mischief that kept the cosmos alive, the spark that unsettled the order of things. Yet in crossing the line from trickster to murderer, he had condemned himself to an eternity of pain. And still, the story lingers within, unease. For while the gods celebrated his capture, while they congratulated themselves on binding the chaos that had so often threatened them, the prophecy remained. They knew Loki's chains would not hold forever. They knew that the venom-dripping serpent was not an ending, but a pause, a long, slow moment before the storm. And so, even as they walked away from his prison, the gods could not shake the feeling that their victory was temporary, that in trying to banish mischief, they had only postponed disaster. And perhaps that is why Loki's story feels so close. Even across centuries, it reminds us that no chain is unbreakable, no silence permanent, and no force of chaos can be kept at bay forever. It waits, patient, in the dark, until the day it is called to rise again. The story turns darker now, as shadows creep into the golden halls of Asgard. For no myth cycle is complete without tragedy, and in Norse mythology, few tales carry more weight than the death of Baldr. Baldr, the shining god, son of Odin and Frigg, was beloved by all who knew him. He was the very embodiment of light, purity, and beauty, a being untouched by corruption or malice. His presence brought joy to gods and mortals alike, and even the forces of nature seemed to soften in his presence. In a pantheon filled with stormbringers, tricksters, and warlords, Baldr was something rare, a figure of hope. But as often happens in stories born of a harsh northern world, even hope is destined to be tested and ultimately destroyed. It began with dreams. Baldr was plagued by visions of his own death, dreams so vivid and terrifying that they shook not only him, but the very walls of Asgard. Odin and Frigg, knowing the weight that dreams carried in their world, recognized these as prophecies rather than idle fears. The gods were troubled, for to imagine Baldr dead was to imagine joy itself extinguished. Frigg, his devoted mother, took it upon herself to shield her son from fate. She traveled across the realms, gaining oaths from every creature, plant, stone, and element, making them swear never to harm Baldr. From the fire that warms the hearth to the iron that cuts through armor, from the towering oak to the tiniest flower, all promised not to raise a hand against him. Frigg believed she had closed every door through which death could enter. For a time, it seemed as though her efforts had succeeded. With Baldr now invulnerable, the gods found amusement in testing this blessing. In the halls of Asgard, they turned it into a game. They would hurl spears, stones, even axes at Baldr, laughing as each weapon fell harmlessly aside. The shining god would stand calmly, unharmed, as though fate itself had been bent to his mother's will. But not all gods were content with this display. Watching from the shadows was Loki, ever the trickster, ever the agent of disruption. To Loki, the spectacle was intolerable. A god so beloved, so perfect, and now untouchable. What better target for mischief, or for something far darker? Loki, as he often did, began by seeking knowledge. He disguised himself as an old woman and went to Frigg herself. In their conversation, he gently pressed her about the oaths she had gathered. Had truly all things in creation sworn to spare? Baldr, Frigg, perhaps too confident, revealed a small oversight. There was one thing she had deemed too small, too harmless, to be of concern: the mistletoe. A plant so insignificant, she believed, could never be a threat to her radiant son. But for Loki, this single omission was enough. With malice hidden beneath his sly smile, Loki plucked a sprig of mistletoe and fashioned from it a dart. Small, light, but filled with deadly potential, it was the key to undoing all of Frigg's protections. Returning to the hall of Asgard, he found Hodr, Baldr's blind brother, standing apart from the game. The others were hurling weapons at Baldr, laughing and cheering, but Hodr could not join them. Loki approached him, feigning kindness, and placed the mistletoe dart in his hand. He offered to guide Hodr's aim, convincing him to take part in the merriment. Trusting his fellow god, Hodr threw in the dart pierced Baldr's body. In an instant, laughter turned to silence. The god of light fell lifeless to the ground. The grief that followed shook Asgard to its core. The death of Baldr was not merely the loss of a beloved son or brother, it was the first falling stone in an avalanche that would lead to Ragnarök. Frigg wept, Odin was struck with dread, and the other gods stood frozen in horror at what had been unleashed. Never before had they felt so powerless, for this was not a wound to be healed by magic or strength. It was fate itself asserting its dominion. They prepared Baldr's funeral with a solemnity that matched the scale of the tragedy. His body was laid upon the great ship Hringhorni, the largest of all vessels, which was to be set ablaze and sent out to sea. But even in this ritual, the gods found themselves humbled. The ship was so massive that no one could move it. Only the strength of the giantess Hyreken, summoned from Jotunheim, was great enough to push it into the water. As she did so, the timbers groaned and the earth itself shook. Flames consumed the vessel as it drifted away, and with it went Baldr, the shining god, into the realm of the dead. The pyre burned so fiercely that sparks flew into the heavens, perhaps the earliest foreshadowing of the fire that would one day engulf the world. But the gods were not ready to accept finality. Ymir, another son of Odin, volunteered to ride to Hel, the realm of the dead, to plead for Baldr's return. Mounted on Odin's steed Sleipnir, he traveled through 9 nights of darkness until he reached the halls of Hel, where Baldr sat pale but dignified among the dead. Hel, the goddess who ruled this realm, listened to Hymir's plea. She offered a condition. Baldr could return to the living, but only if every being in existence wept for him. Such was her test to see whether the love of the world was as complete as the gods claimed. And so messengers went forth, calling upon every creature, stone, and element to shed a tear for Baldr. The world responded with grief. Mountains wept streams, beasts cried out, and mortals mourned. It seemed the condition would be met. Yet when they came to a cave where a giantess named Thek dwelled, she refused. She spoke words of cold indifference, saying that Baldr had given her no joy in life, so why should she weep for him in death? Some say this giantess was Loki in disguise, once again twisting fate with his spite. Whatever the truth, her refusal sealed Baldr's doom. The shining god would remain in Hel until the end of days. From this moment on, the bonds between the gods began to fray. The death of Baldr was more than a personal tragedy. It was a cosmic turning point. Odin, who had always sought knowledge of fate, now knew beyond doubt that Ragnarök would come. The vision of his son's death had been fulfilled, and nothing could alter what lay ahead. But Odin was not content to wait passively. He began gathering wisdom and warriors, preparing for the final battle, even as grief weighed heavily upon him. For the other gods, sorrow turned to rage. The blame fell swiftly upon Loki. Though the blind hand of Hodr had cast the dart, all knew that it was Loki's trickery that had guided it, and so vengeance became inevitable. The Aesir captured Loki, binding him in chains beneath the earth. As punishment, venom from a serpent dripped onto his face, and though his wife Seijen caught much of it in a bowl, The drops that reached him caused him such agony that his writhing shook the ground, becoming the earthquakes known to men. Yet even this punishment was not the end of the tale. The death of Baldr was a spark that would ignite the world's final fire. His absence left a void in Asgard, and his foretold return after Ragnarök was the sole flicker of hope in an otherwise bleak prophecy. Until that day, the gods lived under the shadow of his death, each choice, each battle, colored by the knowledge that doom was creeping ever closer. The story of Baldr's death is not only a tale of tragedy, but also one of inevitability. In Norse mythology, fate is a thread that cannot be severed. Even the gods, for all their power, are bound by it. Frigg's oaths could not change destiny. Odin's wisdom could not outmaneuver it. And Loki's malice, though it hastened the blow, was only another tool through which fate made itself known. Baldr's passing was proof that even the brightest light cannot outshine the shadows forever. In this way, the myth carries a haunting resonance. It reflects the worldview of the Norse people, who lived in a land of harsh winters, fleeting summers, and constant uncertainty. To them, life was precious precisely because it was fragile, and joy was all the more meaningful because it could not last. In Baldr's death, they saw not just the fall of a god, but a mirror of their own lives, brief moments of light, inevitably swallowed by darkness. Yet there is something profoundly moving in this inevitability, for even as the gods mourned, they did not collapse into despair. They carried on, preparing for the battles to come, holding fast to the knowledge that after Ragnarök, Baldr would return. The light would not be gone forever. It would simply sleep until the world was ready for renewal. And so the death of Baldr stands at the very heart of Norse myth, a reminder that endings are not final, but part of a cycle of loss, vengeance, destruction, and rebirth. The great saga of Norse myth moves now toward its most cataclysmic turning point. The destiny that was always waiting at the end of the gods' long story. Ragnarök, not a sudden apocalypse, but a fate whispered from the beginning, sung by seers, and dreaded in the halls of Asgard. Unlike the myths of other cultures, which often speak of endless cycles or the timeless rule of gods, the Norse imagination dared to say, even the mighty are doomed, even gods bleed, even heaven and earth will break apart when the appointed hour arrives. Ragnarök is not just the end, but the most dramatic fulfillment of all that came before. The first tremors of this doom are felt not with swords or fire, but with silence. The world grows colder, the sun seems weaker, pale and dimmed, as if shadows creep across its face. And then, the Fimbul winter begins, a winter that does not end. 3 full years without summer, snow falling from every direction, burying fields and forests under white. Bitter winds howl, rivers freeze, crops die, and famine spreads. Men turn on each other in desperation. Families fall apart, the ties of kinship, the sacred bonds of blood, are shattered as brother kills brother, father turns against son, and all law and order collapses. It is not only a natural disaster, it is the unraveling of human society. The seers foretold it long ago. Before the gods fall, men will already have torn themselves apart. And even as Midgard freezes and suffers, greater forces stir in the 9 realms. Loki, still bound in torment beneath the earth since Baldr's death, finally breaks free. The chains that held him shatter, and the venom dripping from the serpent above no longer holds him down. Rising from his cave, scarred and twisted by centuries of hate, Loki no longer hides his fury. He is a general now, the commander of chaos, and he summons his children to rise with him. The monstrous wolf Fenrir snaps his bonds and prowls free, his jaws stretched so wide that he could swallow the sun itself. The great serpent Jormungandr begins to stir in the oceans, thrashing its coils until waves rise higher than mountains. flooding the shores and smashing ships. Hel, grim queen of the underworld, marches forth from her realm, leading an army of the dead. And Loki himself sails in the ship Naglfar, a vessel unlike any other, for it is built entirely from the fingernails and toenails of the dead. Black sails catch the storm winds, and with him rides a crew of giants, monsters, and all who despise the gods. The sky itself betrays its guardians, the sun and moon, long chased across the heavens by the wolves Skull and Hati, finally fall. At last, the predators catch their prey, and in a bloody frenzy they devour both light-givers. The world is plunged into darkness, a twilight of the gods. Stars vanish from the heavens, the very fabric of the cosmos trembling under the weight of what comes. The great ash tree Yggdrasil groans as it shudders, its roots twisting, its branches cracking. The 9 realms tremble, each feeling the quake of the final battle approaching. And then the horn is blown. Heimdall, the ever-vigilant watchman of Asgard, takes up the Jallarhorn and sounds it across the worlds. Its blast is so loud that it echoes through every corner of creation, awakening gods, men, and monsters alike. The Aesir rise, summoning their weapons, preparing for the last fight. Odin himself rides to the Well of Wisdom one final time, seeking knowledge from the seer Mimir. He gazes into the waters and sees fragments of what must be, knowing it cannot be avoided. With grim resolve, he summons the Einherjar, the fallen warriors of Valhalla, who have trained for this day since their deaths. Clad in shining armor, carrying their spears and swords, they march behind the gods to meet fate head-on. The battlefield is Vigrid, a plain so vast that it stretches for hundreds of leagues, enough to hold the hosts of heaven and the swarms of chaos. There the armies gather, on one side, Odin with the Aesir, the Vanir, and the glorious dead; on the other, Loki with his monstrous brood, the fire giants led by Surtur, and the legions of hell. Thunder shakes the sky, the ground splits, and the greatest battle in all time begins. The clash is immediate, brutal, and hopeless. Odin rides first, mounted upon his 8-legged steed Sleipnir, spear Gungnir in hand. He seeks the wolf Fenrir, for he knows that is his fate. Fenrir's jaws stretch wide enough to swallow him whole. Yet Odin does not flinch. He hurls his spear and charges, but the wolf leaps, seizing him in its massive teeth. The All-Father is devoured, swallowed by the very monster he once feared. A silence falls for a heartbeat. Then rage erupts as his son Vidar, the silent god, steps forward. Vidar wears a special shoe, crafted from all the scraps of leather cut from men's shoes since the beginning of time. Stronger than any material in the world. With it, he plants his foot inside Fenrir's lower jaw, gripping it firm. Then, with all his strength, Vidar forces the beast's mouth apart and drives his sword deep into its throat. Fenrir dies in agony, but Odin is gone, lost forever in its belly. Elsewhere, Thor faces his greatest nemesis, the Midgard serpent, Jormungandr. The two had always been destined to meet at the end. Thunder roars as Thor swings his mighty hammer, Mjolnir, crashing it against the serpent's scales. The ocean boils, waves rise, and lightning splits the sky as god and beast struggle. At last, Thor smashes the serpent's head, killing it, and sending its massive corpse sinking beneath the waves. Yet victory is poisoned literally. As the serpent dies, it spews forth venom, a cloud so thick and deadly that Thor himself breathes it in. He takes only 9 steps before falling dead. Upon the ground, even the strongest of the gods cannot survive fate. Freyr, lord of peace and fertility, faces the fire giant Surtur. But Freyr had long ago given away his sword for love, and now he fights with only an antler. Against Surtur's flaming blade, it is not enough. Freyr is struck down, his light extinguished. Heimdall, the ever-watchful, finds himself face to face with Loki. Brother against brother, guardian against betrayer, they clash with equal fury. In the end, both are slain, their blades piercing each other in a final act of mutual destruction. The battlefield is littered with corpses. Blood soaks the ground. The cries of the dying echo against the roaring flames. And then, when the gods are fallen, when monsters lie slain beside them, Surtur raises his sword one last time. The fire giant sweeps his flaming blade across the world, setting all ablaze. Mountains collapse, seas boil, and the earth itself cracks open. The 9 realms burn in a firestorm so vast that it consumes Yggdrasil's branches, swallows the heavens, and destroys all life. And yet, this is not the end, not entirely. For though the fire rages and the world crumbles, out of the ashes something stirs. The earth sinks into the sea, but later rises again, green and renewed. Rivers flow once more. Untouched fields bloom, and life returns. A new sun rises. The daughter of the one devoured by the wolf, shining brighter and gentler upon the reborn world. From the ruins of Asgard, a few gods survive. Baldr returns from hell, hand in hand with his brother Hygr, reconciled at last. Vidar and Vali, their sons Maui and Magni, all step into the light of the new dawn. They carry with them Mjolnir, the hammer of Thor, to protect the new age. Even humankind is not lost. To humans, Leif and Lifthrasir survive by hiding. Deep within the sacred tree Yggdrasil, they endure the flames and emerge into the fresh world, ready to repopulate the earth. And so the cycle begins again. Ragnarok was an ending, but also a beginning. Death, but also rebirth. In this way, the Norse imagination spoke to something eternal, that no matter how total destruction may seem, life will find a way to rise from the ashes. And so the story closes as it began, with wonder, with terror, with awe. The gods were never immortal in the way we imagine. Their greatness lay not in eternal rule, but in their courage to face doom with open eyes. They fought knowing they would fall. They embraced their fate, and in doing so, gave meaning to the cycle that would follow. Ragnarok is not merely about destruction, it is about the beauty of impermanence. The truth that every ending is also a beginning. When the clash of Ragnarok finally quiets, the world is left in silence, so profound it feels like the very breath of existence has been stolen. The fire has roared across the earth, swallowing forests and cities, consuming the bones of gods and men alike. The oceans have risen in great black waves, crashing down upon the land with the force of mountains, leaving behind nothing but splintered fragments and endless foam. The sky itself, once the canvas for the stars, has collapsed in chaos, torn apart by fire serpents and winged monsters. It is the end. It is silence. It is nothing. And yet, within that silence, something remarkable begins to stir. For the Norse people, this moment was never merely an apocalypse. Ragnarok was not a permanent ending, it was a cycle, a turning of the great wheel of existence. Just as the seasons die and are reborn, just as night fades into dawn, so too does the world collapse only to rise again in the smoldering ruin where all hope seems lost. A fragile and unexpected renewal begins. The poets tell us that after the flames of Surtur have burned themselves to ash, after the earth has been split apart and swallowed by waves, a new land will emerge. Green fields will unfurl across the scarred soil, fresh and vibrant as if no axe or plow had ever cut them. Rivers will flow clear once more, carrying the memory of old blood into the sea. The air, once filled with screams and smoke, will sweeten again, carrying the scent of blooming flowers and the quiet song of birds. It is a rebirth not of glory, but of gentleness. The world has survived its death, and in this newborn world, life is not extinguished. Somewhere deep within the forest, to figures have hidden from the storm. Their names are Leaf and Lithasir, life and eager for life. When the fire raged, they found shelter in the roots of Yggdrasil itself, the great world tree that endures even when the heavens and the earth fall apart. Wrapped in its roots, they drank the dew that dripped from its branches, and there they slept through the destruction of all things. Now, as the light returns, they emerge fragile, human, but alive. From them, the poets say, the new race of humankind will rise. They will step barefoot upon the fresh grass, plant seeds, build homes, and begin the cycle of life anew. Yet humans are not the only survivors. Against all odds, some gods do return from the smoke and ruin. The Allfather Odin has fallen, devoured by the wolf Fenrir. Thor, protector of mankind, has collapsed from the venom of Jormungandr even as he struck the serpent dead. Freyr, noble god of fertility and peace, perished in flames without his sword. But not every divine light is extinguished. In the quiet dawn, we see figures stepping forward, carrying with them the promise of continuity. Baldr, the shining god, beloved of all the gods and all creation, returns from the land of the dead, once struck down by mistletoe and sent to Hell's cold hall. He now rises again in the world reborn. With him comes Higher, his blind brother, reconciled after their tragic clash. Together they walk upon the grass of the new earth, not as enemies but as companions, symbols of healing and forgiveness. After the destruction of the old order, the sons of Thormawi and Magni also survive, carrying with them their father's mighty hammer, Mjolnir. In their hands, it is not a weapon for endless battle, but a tool of protection and renewal. They will guard the new humanity not against giants or serpents, for those foes are gone, but against whatever chaos might someday return. Likewise, the sons of Odin Viwar and Vali stand in the new dawn. Viwar, the silent god who avenged his father by tearing Fenrir apart, now takes his place among the rulers of the new world. Vali, born for vengeance, will find new purpose as the cycle of existence begins again. It is striking that the gods who return are not the old rulers, Odin, Thor. For those who bore the greatest power are gone. Instead, it is the younger generation, the sons, the overlooked, and the wronged who inherit the earth. The world after Ragnarok belongs not to the ancient fathers, but to their children. It is a vision of continuity, but also of change, for the myths seem to suggest that the new world will not be ruled by the same hierarchies and cycles of vengeance as the old. Something different is possible. Above this new world, a miracle occurs in the sky. For when Ragnarok came, the sun, Sol, was swallowed by the great wolf skull. Darkness fell, and hope died with it. Yet Sol had borne a daughter, as radiant and fiery as herself, who now rises into the heavens. The daughter of the sun takes her mother's place, illuminating the fresh fields, shining upon Baldr and Higher, upon Leaf and Lithasir, upon the sons of gods who walk among the new race of men. The light returns, and with it, time itself resumes. But even in renewal, shadows linger. The memory of what was lost can never fully vanish. The myths suggest that the golden age of the gods will not return. The mead halls of Asgard, where feasts rang with laughter and songs of victory, are gone. The vast armies of the Aesir, the shining walls of Valhalla, the mighty halls of Freyr and Odin all lie buried beneath fire and sea. What comes after is quieter, humbler, softer. It is not a new age of gods, but an age where humanity and the few surviving deities share the world in balance. And yet, there's a profound beauty in this vision. The Norse people, living in a harsh, northern world of endless winters, storms, and fleeting summers, did not imagine eternity as static paradise. Their myths taught them that even gods die, even the sun can be swallowed, even the greatest tree can tremble, but they also believed that after destruction comes renewal. To live was to endure, and to endure was to outlast even death. The poets hint that the new gods and humans will gather once more at Ymir, the shining plain, where once Odin's golden hall Gladsheim stood. There they will speak of all that was lost, remembering the ancient battles, the wisdom of the runes, the struggles of their fathers. They will recall the deeds of Thor and Odin not with despair, but as stories that anchor the memory of the old world. And as they tell these stories, the cycle begins again, for myths live as long as they are spoken. Perhaps that is the secret of Ragnarök. It is not only the destruction of the world, but the survival of the story itself. Even in the ashes of the cosmos, the tales endure, carried on the lips of survivors, reborn in the hearts of a new generation. In this way, the aftermath of Ragnarök is not merely a myth about divine renewal, but a reflection of how the Norse themselves saw life. Crops wither in the frost, yet sprout again in spring. Families are broken by death, yet children carry their memory into the future. Winters are long and merciless, but always the sun returns. The story of Ragnarök was not meant to end in despair, but in reassurance. No matter how great the destruction, something will rise from it. And so the new world unfolds, tender and young, upon the bones of the old, a green earth beneath a new sun, watched over by the few gods who remain, populated by the children of humanity who begin again. A fragile world, yes, but also one filled with promise. The cycle continues. When the world has quieted from its burning and the oceans have pulled back from their fury, what remains is a landscape both strange and familiar. It is not the old earth of Midgard, nor the lofty realm of Asgard with its golden halls and towering walls, nor even the shadowed lands of Jotunheimr or Niflheim. This is something new and earth reborn, cleansed by fire and flood, stripped of the excesses of the old age. The smoke of Ragnarök still lingers faintly in the air, but the sky is already brightened by the glow of the new sun, Sol's daughter, who has taken her mother's place in the heavens. The light she casts feels softer than the old, as though it carries within it not only warmth, but the quiet promise of renewal. And beneath that light, life takes hold again, among the fields of fresh grass and the still warm soil of the renewed world. There appear figures familiar, yet changed. They are the gods who survived Ragnarök, or who have returned from beyond death to stand once more upon the living earth. But these are not the old rulers who once commanded thunder, war, and wisdom with unshakable authority. The lords of the former age, Odin, Thor, Freyr, have all perished in their destined battles. In their place comes a quieter pantheon, made not of kings but of heirs, reconciled rivals, and overlooked children. This shift is not accidental. It is the very essence of the new world, a different order, a gentler balance, a possibility for harmony rather than endless strife. Baldr is the first among these renewed gods to step forth. Once he had been the most beloved of all the Aesir, the Shining One, the god whose beauty and fairness lit the hearts of gods and men alike. His death, caused by the trickery of Loki and the weakness of fate, had cast a shadow across the old world. It had been the wound that would never heal, the first crack in the foundations of Asgard, a sorrow so deep that even Odin could not undo it. But now, Baldr returns from Hell's halls, walking not with bitterness or vengeance, but with a calm and radiant grace. His presence in the new dawn is not simply the restoration of what was lost. It is a transformation. He has endured death. He has walked the shadowed paths of the underworld. And he comes back with a wisdom and serenity that makes him fit not for the old world of war, but for the new age of peace. Beside him walks Hyr, the blind brother who had unknowingly struck him down with the fatal dart of mistletoe. In the old world, Hyr had been a figure of tragedy, both victim and instrument of fate's cruelty. But in the aftermath of Ragnarök, he too is restored not in shame, but in reconciliation. The two brothers, once divided by death, now walk together in unity. Their companionship is a symbol of the new world's ethos, forgiveness, balance, and healing where once there had been only rivalry and revenge. Together, Baldr and Ymir stand as the heart of this reborn pantheon, gods not of domination, but of harmony, yet they are not alone. From the ashes of the battle rise the sons of the great thunderer, Thor, Maui and Magni, whose names mean courage and strength, have survived the storm that killed their father. They carry with them the most powerful relic of the old world, Mjolnir, the hammer that Thor wielded against giants, trolls, and monsters. But in their hands, Mjolnir is not a weapon of endless battle. It is a symbol of continuity, a reminder that while destruction has passed, the duty to protect and preserve remains. Where their father's might had been turned outward in constant struggle, theirs will be turned inward, guarding humanity and ensuring that the fragile peace of the new dawn is not shattered. They embody the raw vigor of the past, but tempered by the needs of the present. Alongside them stand the surviving sons of Odin, Viwar and Vali. Viwar, the silent god, is remembered for the moment when he avenged his father's death by tearing open the jaws of Fenrir with his mighty boot and strength beyond measure. He is not a god of words or songs, but of action, endurance, and loyalty. In the new world, he carries forward not only the memory of Odin, but also the quiet determination to endure, to stand firm even when all else falls away. Vali, on the other hand, had been born only for vengeance, brought into being for the sole purpose of killing Ymir after Baldr's death. Yet now, in this world where Baldr and Ymir walk side by side, his old purpose is no longer needed. For Vali, the new world is a chance to find meaning beyond vengeance, to live not as an executioner of fate, but as a guardian of the future. It is striking to notice that the survivors of Ragnarök are not the gods of absolute power, not the rulers or the conquerors. Instead, they are younger gods, brothers and sons, those defined by relationships rather than by domination. The new order is familial, cooperative, and balanced. Where Odin had ruled with cunning and foresight, always burdened by the weight of impending doom, and where Thor had thundered through the 9 worlds with brute force, these new gods emerge, less as tyrants and more as caretakers. And so, the new world is shaped by their presence. The myths tell us that they gather together at Ymir, the shining plain, the very place where once stood Gladsheim, Odin's hall of judgment. But now the old golden hall is gone, and instead, the gods assemble not in splendor, but in simplicity, upon green fields, beneath the open sky, beside the clear rivers of the renewed earth. They speak together of what was lost, remembering the tales of the old gods, recounting the wisdom Odin had gathered, the strength Thor had wielded, the beauty and passion that Freyr had embodied. But their remembrance is not with mourning, it is with gratitude. They do not seek to rebuild the old Asgard exactly as it was. They seek instead to learn from it, to carry its memory forward, while avoiding its mistakes. Even the objects of the old world are not forgotten. For in the grass at Ymir, the surviving gods find the golden tablets, relics of the earliest age, which once held the wisdom of the Aesir. These tablets had been lost in the chaos of the world's long history, but in the new dawn they are rediscovered, gleaming in the light of the new sun. To find them is to recover not only the memory of the past, but also the knowledge necessary to guide the future. They are reminders that even in destruction, nothing is truly lost. What matters returns, in time. In this new age, humanity has a place. Leif and Lithrasir, the human pair who sheltered in the roots of Yggdrasil during the storm of Ragnarök, now walk among the fields, their children growing in number. They will become the ancestors of the new race of humankind, who will live in harmony with the gods not as pawns or warriors, but as companions in a world shared. The relationship between gods and humans has shifted. Where once men were bound by oaths of fealty to Odin, and fought as Einherjar in endless preparation for the end, now they will live alongside gods who are less like rulers and more like kin. The balance of power is altered as well. The new pantheon is smaller, less mighty, but also more human in its concerns. Baldr's wisdom, Whor's humility, Maui and Magni's guardianship, Viwar's endurance, Vali's chance for redemption. These qualities form a vision of divinity that is less about cosmic struggle and more about survival, growth, and peace. It is as though the cycle of death and rebirth has stripped away the excesses of the old order, leaving only what is essential. Yet, beneath this gentle renewal, one cannot help but feel the faint echo of fate. The Norse never imagined a world without cycles, without endings that lead to beginnings. Just as the old gods rose after Ymir's death to shape the cosmos, so too do these gods rise after the death of the cosmos to shape a new age. But just as the old world was destined for destruction, perhaps this new one too carries the seeds of its eventual fall. The wheel turns, and though the myths do not tell us of another Ragnarök, the very structure of their belief suggests that even this renewed world is only one chapter in an endless cycle. For now, however, the surviving gods step into their roles not with dread, but with hope. They are the caretakers of a new dawn, the guardians of a world tender with youth, and under the light of the new sun, they walk together across the shining plain, side by side with humankind, carrying forward the stories of those who fell and shaping a world that, for the moment, is at peace. From the silence that follows the cataclysm of Ragnarök, the Norse myths offer something unexpected: renewal. It is not the final end, not the last word, but the turning of the cycle. For all the fire and flood, the crushing of gods and the breaking of worlds, life is not extinguished. Instead, the myths turn toward rebirth. Out of ash and ruin comes something green, fragile, and yet enduring. Humanity itself, though nearly annihilated, is given a second chance, a chance to begin again in a world cleansed by destruction. The story of the renewal of humanity after Ragnarök is one of the most fascinating elements of Norse mythology. Unlike many apocalyptic tales from other traditions, in which humanity is wiped away or left only as a ghostly remnant, the Norse envision human life rising again from the very heart of nature. Two figures, a man and a woman, emerge from the protection of the forest. They are not warriors, kings, or mighty ancestors. They are simply people, humble, vulnerable, and yet carrying within them the seed of all future generations. Their names are Leif and Lifasir, meaning life, and eager for life. Already, their names tell the story. They embody not only the biological continuation of humanity, but the spirit of survival, the drive to live on despite the most crushing circumstances. As fire and frost swept across the land, as giants and monsters tore the world apart, these two hid deep within Yggdrasil, the world tree. Within its sheltering wood, where no flame could reach, they found safety. When the chaos ended, they merged into a world renewed at dawn that follows the blackest night. This image resonates deeply because it speaks to the resilience of the human spirit. Humanity, the myths tell us, does not survive because of weapons, or power or glory, but because of endurance and persistence. Life itself clings on, even in the most fragile forms. The survival of Leif and Lifasir is a poetic reflection of the natural cycles the Norse people would have observed in their own world: winter giving way to spring, barren fields giving way to growth, and death making way for new life. Imagine the scene: The fires of Surt have burned themselves out. The earth has cracked and flooded. The gods have fallen silent. Out of this silence comes the sound of leaves stirring in the wind. Yggdrasil, though shaken, still stands, and from its roots, in a place called Hodmimis Holt, Hodmimir's Wood, two figures step into the light. They are hungry but alive, naked but unbroken. Round them, shoots of grass and saplings rise from the soil. Streams, once poisoned by blood and ash, now run clear again. The sky, once black with smoke, begins to shine with light. In this new dawn, they are alone, and yet, from them, the entire future of humanity begins. What's striking is that the Norse do not say Leif and Lifaseer are chosen, or that they are special heroes. They are simply human. They do not slay giants, nor do they wield magic. Their survival rests in their ability to endure, to wait, to emerge when the storm has passed. This humility is at the heart of the myth. Unlike the gods, who battle to the death, or the monsters, who burn with rage, humanity's role is not to conquer the end, but to live through it. Humanity continues not through triumph, but through persistence. From the union of Leif and Lifaseer, all future generations of humans are born. The myths do not dwell on the details, but the meaning is clear. A new age begins, populated by the descendants of these two. In this way, humanity is not merely restored, it is renewed. The old world, with its wars and betrayals, its cycles of vengeance and bloodshed, has ended. What comes after is a chance at something new. The myths leave this future unwritten, an open page upon which humanity itself will write. There's an echo here of older Indo-European myths of survivors after world-ending floods or fires. In Greek mythology, Deucalion and Pyrrhus survive the great flood sent by Zeus and repopulate the earth. In biblical tradition, Noah and his family endure the deluge in the ark, carrying forward human life. The Norse version, with Leif and Lifaseer hiding in the world tree, shares this archetype, but places the emphasis not on divine selection or righteousness, but on sheer survival. It is a deeply human perspective, grounded in the hard realities of northern life, where winters could kill the strongest, and survival often depended on shelter, patience, and endurance. It is also worth noting that Leif and Lifaseer do not emerge into a barren wasteland, but into a world that is, in its own way, healed. After the devastation, the earth blossoms again. Rivers flow, trees grow, and the air clears. The death of the old world has made way for the birth of the new. This is not simply survival, it is renewal. Humanity does not continue in spite of the destruction, but because of it. Ragnarok clears the slate, burning away the corruption and decay of the old age, so that something new can take root. The cyclical vision of time is at the heart of Norse cosmology. Just as the seasons turn, just as day follows night, so too does the world follow a cycle of destruction and rebirth. Ragnarok is terrifying, but it is also necessary. Without winter, there can be no spring. Without death, no rebirth. Leif and Lifaseer are the human embodiment of this cycle. The springtime of humanity after the long winter of Ragnarok. We might ask, why did the Norse envision this renewal at all? Why not end the story with the fiery destruction of gods and giants? The answer may lie in their deep connection to nature and the rhythms of the earth. For a people whose survival depended on enduring harsh winters and who lived close to the land, the idea that life always returns would have been a powerful truth. No matter how cold the winter, spring always came. No matter how barren the soil, green shoots always returned. To tell of an ending without renewal would have been contrary to their lived experience. The myth reflects not only their cosmology, but their worldview. That endurance leads to rebirth. The role of Yggdrasil here is also deeply symbolic. The world tree is not destroyed by Ragnarok, though shaken, though scorched and battered. It remains standing. Within its sheltering branches, life hides and survives. The image is almost archetypal, the tree of life carrying within it the seeds of the future. Yggdrasil is both a cosmic axis and a protector. It is the womb from which humanity is born again. In many traditions, trees symbolize continuity, shelter, and renewal, and here, the world tree fulfills that role perfectly. Leif and Lifaseer's story also carries a subtle moral weight. If the gods fall because of pride, vengeance, and the endless cycle of war, humanity survives through humility, patience, and connection to the natural world. It is almost as if the myths are telling us that in the new age, humanity must live differently, closer to nature, in harmony with life, not in endless cycles of conflict. Whether or not the Norse storytellers intended this lesson, it is one that resonates. Humanity endures not by being the strongest, but by being the most adaptable. There is a haunting beauty in the simplicity of this myth. No armies march into the new world, no great thrones are raised. Instead, to human beings, stripped of everything but life itself, emerge into the light of a new dawn. Their story is not about conquest, but about survival, not about glory, but about continuity. And in that continuity lies hope. As we consider the story of Leif and Lifaseer, it also invites us to reflect on the nature of humanity itself. What is it that defines us? Is it our power, our empires, our gods, or is it our ability to endure, to carry life forward even when everything seems lost? The Norse myths seem to answer clearly. Humanity is defined by its resilience. Even when the gods themselves fall, humanity continues. This renewal of humanity also marks a profound shift in perspective. In the earlier chapters of myth, humanity is often peripheral. The gods, giants, and monsters take center stage. Humans are small, fragile, and overshadowed by the cosmic dramas of divine beings. But after Ragnarök, humanity steps forward. With the gods gone or diminished, the new age is humanity's age. The myths do not spell out what kind of world will follow, but they place humanity at its heart. This may be the most radical message of all, that in the end, after the fall of gods and giants, the future belongs to humanity. The myths do not glorify this with promises of eternal paradise or divine favor. Instead, they offer something humbler, but perhaps more meaningful, a chance to live, to rebuild, to continue the story. Humanity is not erased in the storm of Ragnarök. It is the spark that survives. And so the image lingers, to figures stepping into a new dawn, the air fresh, the earth green, the sky clear. Around them, the ruins of the old world lie silent, but before them stretches the open possibility of the new. They are alone, but not without hope. In their hands, in their lives, lies the entire future of humankind. The Norse myths do not tell us what that future looks like. Perhaps it was never meant to be told. Perhaps it was always meant to be lived by. Us, the descendants of those who endure, the children of life, and the eager will to live. And in that silence, that unwritten page, we find both the mystery and the promise of the renewal of humanity. In the great sweep of Norse myth, after the rebirth of gods and men, the tales move into quieter, subtler waters. Yet within this calmer sea lies a profound question. How does humanity, fragile and finite, connect with the divine in the newly renewed world? The myths do not offer a single clear answer, but instead weave a pattern of symbols of gods who remain, of mortals who begin again, of knowledge lost and found, that invites us to reflect on the enduring bond between heaven and earth. This is the heart of the next chapter, the bridge between gods and humans, and the ways this bond shapes the cycle of existence. The Norse cosmos is never static. It shifts, collapses, and reforms, like waves rising and falling upon a shore. When Ragnarök consumed the old world, gods died, humans were nearly extinguished, and creation itself trembled on the edge of nothingness. But from the wreckage, a new world dawned, green, fertile, bathed in light, and brimming with life. This rebirth raises a question. In such a transformed reality, what role do the gods still play? And what role do humans play in return? Do the gods rule, as they once did, or do they now share a quieter companionship with mortals who must shape their own destinies? The surviving gods give us a clue. Baldr, radiant god of light, returns from the underworld. He had once been the most beloved among the Aesir, yet his untimely death cast a shadow across all the realms. His resurrection after Ragnarök signals more than his own triumph. It marks the restoration of hope, the promise that goodness and harmony cannot be extinguished. Forever, he is joined by Ymir, his blind brother, whose accidental crime had once plunged the world into grief. The myths suggest that in this new age, Baldr and Ymir are reconciled, a sign that forgiveness and healing stand at the core of the renewed creation. Alongside them, the sons of Thor and Maui carry forward their father's legacy. They inherit Mjolnir, the mighty hammer, symbol of strength, protection, and cosmic order. But the hammer in their hands may serve a different purpose than it once did. In the old world, Mjolnir was a weapon wielded against giants, monsters, and chaos itself. In the new world, with many of those threats diminished or destroyed, perhaps the hammer becomes a tool of guardianship, shaping and safeguarding a fragile creation rather than battling to the death. The symbolism shifts subtly from destruction to preservation, from war to stewardship. Viwar, the silent god who avenged Odin by tearing apart the jaws of the great wolf Fenrir, also remains. His entrance speaks to a deeper truth that silence, patience, and resilience are just as necessary to survival as power and brilliance. And Vali, another son of Odin, who avenged Baldr's death before Ragnarök, continues on as well. Together, these surviving gods embody continuity. They are not entirely new beings, but threads from the old woven into the fabric of the new. They carry memory, wisdom, and lessons, ensuring that the mistakes of the past need not be repeated. Yet even as these gods remain, the myths shift their gaze more intently toward humanity. Leif and Lifthrasir, the two mortals who hid within the branches of Yggdrasil during the fire and storm, emerge to populate the earth anew. Their survival is not accidental, it is symbolic. Life endures, fragile but unyielding. Nestled in the roots of the cosmic tree, they become the parents of a new race of humans, free from the immediate shadow of the old god's dominion. Their children will know the gods, yes, but they will also inherit a world where their own choices and labor shape destiny, just as much as divine will. This mingling of divine and human presence in the renewed world sparks a profound shift in tone. Where once the gods were distant, commanding forces, in the new cycle they are companions, guides, and perhaps even equals in the struggle to maintain order and meaning. Baldr's light shines for all, but it does not dominate. Thor's hammer still protects, but it is shared by his sons. The gods exist, yet they no longer tower over mortals in the same way. Instead, they share the landscape of renewal, suggesting a closer bond, a more direct interplay between the divine and the human. The myths are not explicit here, but later interpretations drawn from both poetic and prose sources invite us to imagine rituals, stories, and traditions where humans and gods interact more intimately. One could picture feasts held in sacred groves where the new descendants of Leif and Lifthrasir honor Baldr's return with songs of joy. One might imagine offerings laid at the feet of Thor's sons, not to beg for victory in war, but to ask for good harvests, calm seas and steady skies. In this way, the surviving gods no longer preside over a world of constant battle. They guide a gentler order, where humans step forward to take more responsibility for their fate. But beneath this vision lies an unspoken tension. If the gods and humans share this renewed world, what prevents the cycle of destruction from repeating again? Ragnarök, after all, was not merely a tragedy, it was a cleansing, a breaking apart of a flawed cosmos. If arrogance, violence, or betrayal return, will another cataclysm someday rise to tear down even this new creation? The myths leave this question unanswered, but they encourage reflection. Perhaps the reconciliation of Baldr and Ymir is meant to show that cycles can be healed through forgiveness. Perhaps the preservation of Thor's hammer symbolizes the need for vigilance without domination. And perhaps Leif and Lithasir's simple act of survival teaches that endurance, above all, is the key to continuity. The gods, then, are no longer supreme masters. They are reminders, companions, and living symbols of what must be remembered. They embody strength, light, silence, and reconciliation. Humans, on the other hand, carry the weight of continuity. They are the seed of the future, the fragile vessels through which all stories, songs, and wisdom will pass. Together, gods and humans must weave a new pattern, one where memory guards against hubris and humility tempers power. And here lies one of the most beautiful aspects of Norse mythology. The cycle does not erase the past, but transforms it. The gods who remain are not untouched. They carry scars, memories, and echoes of the great fall. Humans, too, inherit not only life, but the lessons of survival, endurance, and the cost of destruction. The new world is not a blank page, it is a palimpsest written over but never entirely erasing what came before. As the sun rises again after Ragnarök, reborn and radiant, it shines upon this new harmony of gods and men. Its light touches the green fields, the clear rivers, the mountains unscarred by fire, and the faces of those who survived. In this light, the bridge between the divine and the mortal gleams brightly, inviting reflection on what it means to live in a world where hope has returned, but responsibility rests upon every soul. And so the story moves forward. The surviving gods walk beside humanity, not above it, shaping a world that is gentler, perhaps wiser, yet still vulnerable. The question that lingers is whether this bond will hold, or whether the seeds of another cycle already stir in the soil. For now, though, the new world breathes, and the bridge between gods and humans stands firm. At the heart of Norse cosmology stands Yggdrasil, the great ash tree, a living axis that binds the 9 worlds together. To the Norse imagination, this tree was not simply a metaphor, but the very skeleton upon which reality was suspended, an ever-living framework whose roots and branches carried the weight of gods, men, giants, dwarves, and unseen spirits. To picture Yggdrasil is to picture a universe alive, its essence flowing like sap, and its fate tied to the rhythms of time itself. The poets never wrote of it in the language of abstraction. They described it in breath, bark, and soil, as though one could walk into a clearing, look up, and glimpse its branches disappearing into infinity. The ancients told that the trunk of Yggdrasil towered beyond imagination, piercing sky after sky, until its crown stretched into realms that no eye could measure. Its branches sheltered gods like a great cathedral, their shade falling across Asgard, Midgard, and even the frozen world of Jotunheim. Yet the tree's strength did not come from its height alone, but from its roots, vast and deep, stretching outward to touch the cosmic wells, the well of Erd, where the Norns wove destiny, Mimir's well, where wisdom was guarded by memory and sacrifice, and the well of Vergelmir, a bubbling spring in the land of frost and shadows, where the dragon Nihogger ceaselessly gnawed. To speak of Yggdrasil was to speak of connection, because everything that existed, from the smallest insect to Odin himself, lived within its structure. The Norse saw in Yggdrasil a mirror of their own lives. Just as the tree grew, weakened, endured, and renewed, so too did families, kingdoms, and the very ages of the cosmos. The sagas describe time not as a straight line, but as a wheel, a recurring circle, where destruction and renewal followed each other like winter after summer. Ragnarok itself was not final doom, but part of this eternal rhythm, a pruning of the branches so new shoots might rise. Beneath the surface, this vision of endless cycles is what gave the myths their strange, haunting beauty. It suggested that no end is permanent, no death without seed, no ruin without some echo of rebirth. The Norns, those silent weavers who dwelled beside the well of Erd, embodied this truth. Day after day, they watered Yggdrasil with the waters of destiny, keeping its bark alive. They carved runes into its trunk, inscriptions of fate that could not be altered, and yet, paradoxically, their work was never finished. They wove as long as time endured, but their tapestry had no final pattern. To the Norse mind, this was the essence of life. Fate was binding, yet it was also flowing, threads interlacing in a design that no single being, not even Odin, could fully comprehend. And yet, Yggdrasil was not an image of serene harmony. It was alive with conflict, teeming with creatures that revealed the fragility of creation. High above, an eagle perched in the branches, watching with ancient eyes, while between its eyes, a hawk named Vedrfolnir darted restlessly, carrying messages across the skies. Lower down, for stags fed upon the leaves, their hunger constant, their names whispering winds of the seasons. And deep below, Nihogr clawed and chewed at the roots, his venom dripping into the soil, threatening always to weaken the foundation of worlds. Between eagle and dragon, the squirrel Ratatoskr raced tirelessly, carrying insults, mischief, and malice from branch to root, stirring quarrels in the very veins of existence. This was no idle detail in the myth. It was a reminder. The cosmos itself was never stable, always strained between forces of growth and forces of decay. The tree endured not because it was untouched, but because it withstood, scarred yet unbroken. To those who lived in the harsh climates of Scandinavia, this vision resonated deeply. Farmers who saw their crops rise in summer only to wither in winter, sailors who battled seas that could nourish or destroy, warriors who knew that every feast might be their last. All of them recognized Yggdrasil in their own lives. The universe was not a steady march toward progress, nor was it a bleak pit of despair. It was a cycle, eternal, in which even gods died but seeds endured. This worldview, cyclical and resilient, gave the Norse people a way to interpret hardship. Winter may claim the earth, but spring will always return. Ragnarök may fell the gods, but a new dawn will always rise. The idea of eternal cycles reaches its most profound expression in the aftermath of Ragnarök. After the fires have burned, the seas swallowed land, and the sky split apart, the tree itself is said to tremble yet endure. From its shelter emerge Lif and Aesir, the last humans. Hidden among its leaves, nourished by morning dew, they step into the silence of a reborn world, carrying humanity forward. In this image lies the very heart of Norse myth. Though destruction may sweep away even gods, the rhythm of life continues, hidden in the veins of Yggdrasil. The tree shelters the promise of renewal. In many ways, Yggdrasil is not unique, but part of a vast human instinct to imagine the cosmos as a tree across the world. Cultures envision sacred trees at the center of existence. The Mesopotamians spoke of the tree of life in their gardens of paradise, guarded by divine beings. The Hindus told of the Ashvatha tree, its roots reaching into the heavens, its branches descending into the world. The Mayans described the ceiba, a world tree whose branches supported the heavens and whose roots entered the underworld. Even in the biblical imagination, the tree of knowledge and the tree of life stand as central symbols of humanity's fate. That the Norse to envision their world as an immense tree suggests a universal truth. Human beings see in trees the perfect emblem of life's endurance, rooted in the past, branching into the future, fragile yet resilient, always renewing. But Yggdrasil is more than a cosmic tree. It is the embodiment of time itself. The sagas describe how it suffers decay, how its bark cracks, its branches shake, its roots bleed, and yet it persists. In this, the Norse saw their own world mirrored. Every hall they built would one day fall, every king's reign would end, every warrior would find his last battle. Yet as long as the tree endured, existence continued. This gave the myths a strange balance between fatalism and hope. Fate was inescapable. Ragnarok would come, but even in the face of fated doom, endurance remained. What mattered was not escaping death, but recognizing the eternal return that followed. Consider how different this is from the linear visions of time held by other cultures. Christianity, for instance, imagines a creation, a fall, a redemption, and a final judgment that ends history in a new heaven and new earth. Time marches in a line, beginning to end. The Norse did not think this way. For them, the universe breathed in cycles. The destruction of Ragnarok was not a final end, but one season in the rhythm of the cosmos. And because they lived in lands of long winters, brief summers, and endless repetitions of cold and thaw, this cycle was not an abstraction. It was reality. Their myths reflected the landscape, where light and dark chased each other endlessly. This worldview shaped their courage to know that the world would end, and yet to fight bravely anyway was the highest form of honor. The gods themselves lived this truth. Odin gathered warriors into Valhalla not because they could prevent Ragnarok, but because standing against fate with courage was the noblest act. Thor fought giants not because he could finally defeat chaos, but because holding chaos at bay for one more day was itself worthy. Even Loki, in his betrayals, was part of the cycle, the necessary shadow that ensured the wheel would turn. To live within Yggdrasil was to live in a universe where nothing was eternal except the cycle itself. The cosmic tree also embodied wisdom. At its roots lay Mimir's well, where Odin sacrificed his eye for knowledge, accepting blindness in one sense to gain sight in another. This sacrifice, this willingness to lose in order to gain, reflects again the cyclical nature of wisdom. Vision is born of loss, power is born of weakness, death is born of life, and life of death. At another root, the Norns poured water and white clay upon the trunk, preventing it from rotting, sustaining its youth. Their care symbolized the constant tending that life demands, and yet, despite their labor, the tree still trembled with decay. In this paradox, the Norse found meaning. Even the best efforts cannot stop fate, but effort itself is sacred. Picture the tree now in your imagination, roots sinking into darkness, branches glowing in the heavens, the eagle's wings spread above, the dragon's scales grinding below, and between them the endless scampering of Ratatoskr, carrying whispers. Around it, the 9 worlds hum like organs of a body, Asgard above, Midgard in the middle, Niflheim in the shadows, Jotunheim frozen and wild. Each realm pulses with life, yet all are bound to the same trunk. This image is not one of neat order, but of vibrant, tangled connection. It is the Norse universe in its full, living complexity. And when the poets described the end of days, they spoke of the tree shaking, of its roots quivering, of its branches snapping in the storm of Ragnarok. Yet even then, the tree is not destroyed. Scarred, wounded, diminished, yes, but not destroyed. Life clings to it, hidden in dew, waiting to begin again. This is why the story of Ragnarök is not tragedy, but mythic truth. It is the knowledge that death is part of a greater rhythm, that endings are also beginnings, that Yggdrasil itself breathes with the pulse of eternity. So the Norse imagined their universe as a living cycle, eternal yet fragile, rooted in the cosmic tree. To them, this vision was not a philosophical system, but a lived truth. Every storm, every famine, every battle was another shiver of the tree, another turn of the cycle. They stood beneath it, small as ants on its bark, yet part of its structure. And though they knew their lives were brief, they also knew that the rhythm endured. And in that rhythm, there was meaning. Yggdrasil was not merely the world tree. It was the very breath of time, the promise that though death may come, life will rise again. Even as Yggdrasil stretches its vast branches into the heavens and sinks its roots into the underworld, binding together gods, men, and giants, there lingers a question at the very core of Norse thought. What lies beyond fate? For if Ragnarök has been fought and lost, if the gods have perished and yet risen again, if humanity itself has been swept away only to sprout anew, then we are faced with a truth far older than even the gods themselves, truths whispered in riddles, sung in kennings, and preserved in the deepest fragments of the myths. These truths are not stories of battle or of grand feasts, but of something subtler, deeper, the fabric that underlies all of creation, the principles that bind and unbind, the hidden order of existence itself. This is where the Norse myths turn, from the stage of gods and giants to the realm of the unseen, to forces like fate, wisdom, and the pursuit of knowledge. And if there is one figure who embodies these mysteries more than any other, it is Odin All-Father, not as the warrior king, but as the seeker, the wanderer, the one who sacrifices not for glory, but for wisdom. In many ways, Odin is the most complex of all the Norse gods, for he is not merely the ruler of Asgard, nor simply the father of many divine children. He is instead a god defined by hunger, not hunger for food or riches, but hunger for secrets. He is the god who seeks knowledge even when it wounds him, even when it costs him dearly. In fact, the greatest tales of Odin's life are not those of his victories on the battlefield, but of his sacrifices made at the altar of wisdom. If Thor represents strength and Loki cunning, Odin embodies the endless, restless pursuit of truth. One of the most profound stories that illustrates this comes in his fateful encounter with Mimir's well. This was no ordinary well, but a sacred spring that bubbled beneath one of Yggdrasil's great roots. Hidden deep in the realm of the frost giants, its guardian was Mimir, a being of immense wisdom. For the waters of the well were infused with knowledge of all that had been, and all that would come. To drink from it was to pierce the veil of the cosmos itself, to grasp truths beyond the comprehension of even gods. Odin, knowing this, sought the well and demanded a draught. But Mimir was no fool. He would not give this gift freely. Instead, he named the price. Odin must give one of his eyes, and so Odin, the king of the gods, plucked out his own eye and cast it into the depths of the well. In doing so, he was forever marked half blind in the physical sense, but all-seeing in the spiritual. He drank from the well, and the wisdom it carried surged through him, visions of the future, knowledge of the runes, insight into the cycles of existence. From that day forth, Odin's empty eye socket was a reminder of the truth that all knowledge has a cost. To see more clearly, one must be willing to lose something precious. Yet this sacrifice was not enough, for Odin's hunger could not be quenched with one act alone. Another tale tells of a far greater ordeal, one that reflects both his desperation and his determination. Yearning to master the runes, the sacred symbols that embodied magic, destiny, and the very fabric of reality, Odin subjected himself to an act of supreme suffering. He took his spear, Gungnir, and drove it into his own flesh. Then he hung, himself upon Yggdrasil, suspended between life and death, denied food and water, gazing downward into the abyss below. There he remained for 9 nights, his body racked with agony, his spirit hovering on the brink of the underworld. It was a symbolic death, an initiation of sorts, for only by surrendering his mortal aspect, by breaking himself upon the tree of life, could Odin awaken to the hidden knowledge of the runes. On the 9th night, as he peered into the void, the symbols revealed themselves, mystical signs carved into the very essence of the cosmos. With a cry of triumph, Odin seized them, mastering their meanings and their power, and in that moment, he was reborn not as a mere chieftain of the gods, but as the true All-Father, the one who holds sway not only by might, but by wisdom and magic. The story is striking for many reasons. Unlike the myths of other cultures, where gods receive knowledge as gifts from higher beings, Odin wrests his wisdom through self-inflicted torment. He is not granted power. He earns it, and he earns it by embodying the very principle that lies at the heart of Norse cosmology, that every victory, every gift, every shred of insight comes at a cost. To gain, one must sacrifice. To live, one must face death. This is the eternal balance that the Norse people saw in the world around them. A world of harsh winters, fleeting summers, and constant struggle. The runes themselves are central to this mystery. To the Norse, runes were not merely letters or a way to record speech. They were cosmic symbols, each carrying immense power. They could be carved into weapons to grant strength, inscribed on wood to protect, sung as chants to heal or curse. Each rune was both a sound and a concept, both a letter and a spell, and Odin, through his suffering, unlocked their secrets, becoming the master of rune magic and of fate itself. In some versions of the tale, he shares these runes with mankind, teaching them so that mortals too might wield magic and shape their destinies. In others, he guards them more jealously, ensuring that such knowledge is not spread too freely. But if runes are the language of fate, then fate itself was another mystery that the Norse sought to understand and feared. The idea of fate, or word, was central to their worldview. It was not a simple, linear destiny, but a web, woven by beings older than the gods themselves, the Norns. These 3 figures are Verandi, and Skuld dwelt at the base of Yggdrasil, tending its roots and spinning the threads of every life, divine and mortal alike. They did not ask permission, nor could even Odin command them. Their weaving was absolute, their decrees unchangeable. The gods could foresee their own ends, as Odin did through Mimir's well, but they could not prevent them. Ragnarök would come, no matter what. And yet, rather than despair, Odin embodies the response of the Norse spirit, not resignation, but defiance. Even knowing his fate, he seeks to prepare, to gather knowledge, to fight until the very end. He does not cling to the illusion of victory. He clings to the nobility of resistance. In this way, Odin is less a god of comfort and more a god of struggle, a reflection of the people who worshipped him. For in the icy north, life itself was a battle, and wisdom was not a luxury but a weapon. There is also the tale of Odin's quest for the mead of poetry, another of his great sacrifices for wisdom. This magical drink, brewed from the blood of a wise being named Kvasir, granted inspiration and eloquence to those who consumed it. Guarded by the giant Suttungr, it was kept in 3 great vessels, hidden away in a mountain. To obtain it, Odin, disguised himself as a laborer, tricked Suttungr's brother into granting him access, and seduced Suttungr's daughter Gunnhild, who guarded the mead. For 3 nights he lay with her, and in return she allowed him to drink deeply of the vessels. Then, transforming into an eagle, Odin flew back to Asgard with the mead in his belly, where he spat it out into containers for the gods and for mankind. But in his haste, some of it spilled, falling to the earth and it was said that this portion became the source of bad poetry, given to those who lacked skill. What emerges from all these stories is a portrait of a God who is willing to bleed, to deceive, to give, and to take all in the service of wisdom. He is not pure, nor wholly noble. He is cunning, manipulative, even ruthless. But he is also relentless, and it is this relentlessness that defines him. For Odin, wisdom is not a possession. It is a path, one walked with sacrifice after sacrifice, with endless striving. As we reflect on Odin's journey, we can see how it mirrors the broader themes of Norse mythology. The gods themselves are not immortal in the sense of being untouchable. They are vulnerable, flawed, and bound by fate. They gain their strength not from perfection, but from persistence. They are, in a sense, deeply human, embodying both the greatness and the frailty of mankind. Odin's sacrifices remind us that knowledge and wisdom are never free. They must be earned, and the price is always high. And so, as we journey deeper into the myths, we begin to see the Norse cosmos not simply as a stage of battles and adventures, but as a living system of lessons. Every god, every giant, every creature reflects some truth about existence. With Odin, we are shown the value of knowledge and the inevitability of sacrifice. With the Norns, we are reminded of the unbreakable chains of fate, and with the runes, we glimpse the idea that the world itself is written in patterns, waiting to be deciphered by those bold enough to suffer for their insight. In this way, the stories of Odin's sacrifices bridge the world of myth and the world of philosophy. They ask us not merely to admire the gods, but to see ourselves in them, to understand that in every life there is a well of Ymir, a Yggdrasil to be hung upon, a mead of poetry to be chased. And perhaps this is the greatest secret of Odin, that he is not a god to be worshipped from afar, but a mirror of the human condition itself, the endless hunger for meaning, the willingness to pay any price for truth, and the unyielding courage to face fate with open eyes, even if one of them must be given up along the way. As the dust of the great Ragnarök settled and the fires dimmed into embers, across the shattered realms, a profound stillness blanketed the worlds. The devastation had been immense, a cataclysm that consumed gods and giants alike. Yet in its aftermath, life stirred once more, delicate and tentative, yet imbued with the promise of renewal. The survivors, those few gods who had withstood the tide of destruction, and the humans who had emerged from the shadows, found themselves in a world both familiar and unrecognizable. The sky was clearer, the rivers purer, and the forests, though scarred, carried the unmistakable scent of rebirth. Nature itself seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, as though acknowledging that even the cycles of destruction could yield beauty. Odin, still bearing the scars of his endless quest for wisdom, gazed upon the new world with a contemplative serenity. His single glowing eye swept over the plains and valleys, lingering on the small sparks of civilization that had begun to reemerge. The lessons of the past weighed heavily upon him, the arrogance of the gods, the fragility of life, the inevitability of fate. Yet in these reflections, he found not despair, but a profound clarity. The world, though wounded, offered a canvas upon which the survivors could shape a future unbound by the errors of the past. He understood, as he had always known, that wisdom was not a possession, but a journey, a continuous striving toward understanding, tempered by humility and tempered by the scars of loss. Thor, the thunderous protector, moved among the reborn, forests and mountains, his hammer Mjolnir still pulsing with latent energy. Where he walked, rivers glistened and new growth sprouted, as if the very earth recognized his guardianship. He had fought with unyielding strength, yet in this new age, he recognized that his might alone could not safeguard what had been lost. Vigilance required not just force, but foresight and restraint. Thor's presence was a reminder that even in a world newly forged, the echoes of conflict could not be silenced entirely. Every strike of his hammer was both a celebration of survival and a solemn vow to prevent the chaos that had nearly consumed existence from returning. Loki, the cunning trickster, lingered in the shadows of the reborn realms, his presence both unsettling and essential. He had been a catalyst of upheaval, a force of chaos whose cleverness had precipitated events both disastrous and enlightening. Yet in this era of renewal, even he seemed tempered, aware that the strands he pulled in the tapestry of fate must now be woven with care. His mischief persisted, yes, but it took on a different form, subtle guidance, challenges designed not to destroy, but to teach. The lessons of balance had settled in him, that creation and destruction, order and chaos, light and shadow were eternally intertwined, each giving meaning to the other. The humans, who had endured the ravages of Ragnarök and emerged into this reborn world, were perhaps the most profound witnesses to the lessons of the past. They had seen the limits of their own power, the consequences of arrogance, and the delicate fragility of existence. Yet in their resilience lay hope. They began to build, not in defiance of the gods, but in acknowledgement of their guidance and their legacy. Villages rose amidst the fertile plains, and from the ashes of old cities, new centers of learning and culture flourished. Mortals revered the surviving gods, not as distant deities, but as teachers and companions, guiding them toward a future where wisdom, courage, and cooperation could flourish. The remnants of the old world were scattered throughout the realms, silent witnesses to the cycles that had come and gone. Broken mountains, scorched forests, and ruined fortresses bore the imprint of the past. Yet even in these scars, there was purpose. Each ruin was a reminder that growth required remembrance, that wisdom was forged through both triumph and catastrophe. Odin often wandered among these remnants, tracing the history written in stone and soil, seeking to understand how the past could illuminate the path forward. He meditated upon the lessons embedded in the cosmos itself, recognizing that the cycles of creation and destruction were not punishments, but the mechanisms through which life and knowledge evolved. Yggdrasil, the world tree, stood at the center of this new age, its branches stretching across realms both old and newly formed. Its roots had endured the fire and flood of Ragnarök, entwining the remnants of shattered worlds and nourishing the rebirth. The tree hummed with quiet energy, a subtle reminder that all life, all destiny, and all wisdom were interconnected. The surviving gods drew strength from Yggdrasil, and through its presence, they understood that their actions, their choices, and their sacrifices were threads woven into the greater tapestry of existence. The tree itself seemed to pulse with the rhythms of the universe, whispering truths to those who would listen, that even in chaos, there is order, even in loss, there is potential. Among these truths was the profound understanding of mortality and impermanence. The gods, once seemingly invincible, had been humbled. The humans, once fragile, had proven their resilience. Both understood that life, whether divine or mortal, was a fleeting spark within the vast cosmic expanse. Yet it was this very impermanence that gave existence its value and its urgency. Odin taught that knowledge must be sought not for dominance, but for understanding. Thor, that strength must serve life, not merely power. Loki, that cunning must illuminate paths, not only sow discord. And the humans, observing these principles, began to cultivate societies where wisdom and cooperation were paramount. In this era, magic and runes found new expression. The secrets Odin had endured immense suffering to unlock were shared selectively, passed to those capable of wielding them responsibly. Mortals learned to harness elemental forces, to understand the rhythms of nature, and to read the subtle signs embedded within Yggdrasil and the cosmos. The divine guidance of the surviving gods was subtle but profound, a gentle nudge rather than overt interference, encouraging humanity to rise to its potential while honoring the balance of creation. The bonds forged in the crucible of Ragnarök endured as well. Relationships among the gods, once strained by conflict and miscalculation, evolved into alliances of mutual respect and shared purpose. Odin's wisdom tempered Thor's strength. Loki's cunning illuminated possibilities that others might overlook. Together, they created a governance not of tyranny or unilateral power, but of counsel, guidance, and protection. These relationships extended to humans as well, creating a tapestry of interaction that wove mortals and immortals together in shared stewardship of the new realms. The natural world itself began to flourish under this careful balance. Forests grew taller and more vibrant, rivers ran clearer, and the creatures that had survived or had been reborn thrived. Even beings of the old world, such as elves, dwarves, and spirits of the land, found new roles within this reconstructed cosmos. Their presence reminded the inhabitants that the past was never fully gone. It lived on in forms adapted to the new age. The interplay of life, magic, and divinity created an environment where wonder and discovery could thrive, where the mysteries of the universe remained both a challenge and a source of inspiration. Stories of the old world were preserved with great reverence. Bards and scholars chronicled the fall and rebirth of gods and men alike, embedding the lessons of Ragnarök into the cultural memory of humanity. These tales became more than entertainment. They were instruction manuals for survival, guides to understanding eternal cycles, and warnings of the costs of hubris. In villages, around fires, and in the halls of kings, the sagas were recounted, reminding listeners that courage, wisdom, and humility were essential to enduring the challenges of existence. As the age progressed, new challenges arose, not the cataclysmic destruction of Ragnarök, but subtler tests, conflicts over resources, moral dilemmas, and the ever-present temptation of power. Yet the lessons of the past guided decisions. Communities that honored the teachings of the surviving gods prospered. Those that ignored them stumbled, learning through experience that the cycles of the cosmos demanded respect, patience, and understanding. The balance between human agency and divine guidance became the foundation of a harmonious world. In this time, Odin often reflected upon the enduring patterns of existence. He understood that the cycles of birth, death, and rebirth were not merely cosmic events, but reflections of the choices and actions of all beings. Strength, wisdom, and cunning were necessary, but they were not sufficient without temperance, compassion, and foresight. The survivors, both divine and mortal, were bound together by the shared recognition of these principles, and through this unity, the world began to stabilize and flourish in ways it never had before. The age also brought a renewed appreciation for the mysteries of the cosmos. The 9 realms, once fractured and threatened, were now interconnected with a clarity born of experience. The heavens, the earth, and the underworld existed not as separate entities, but as interdependent domains, each influencing the others. The surviving gods served as guides through these interconnections, teaching mortals to read the signs of the stars, the movements of the rivers, and the subtle whispers of the forests. Knowledge and magic were tools for understanding, not instruments of domination, and this understanding became the cornerstone of civilization in the new age. As centuries passed, the lessons of Ragnarök and its aftermath became embedded in the very culture of the world. Humans developed rituals, celebrations, and traditions to honor the gods, the cycles of existence, and the wisdom of the past. These practices were not mere superstition. They were reminders of the delicate balance between life and death, chaos and order, growth and decay. They reinforced the understanding that every action carried consequence, that every choice rippled through the tapestry of existence, and that the survival of both gods and men depended upon awareness, foresight, and humility. And so, in the reflections of this new age, the cosmos itself seemed to sigh with relief and anticipation. The scars of the past remained, etched into mountains, rivers, and the hearts of those who remembered. Yet from those scars, beauty and wisdom emerged. The surviving gods, once embroiled in endless struggle, now guided, protected, and inspired humanity, tempered by catastrophe and enlightened by the teachings of divine and natural law, embraced a future that honored the past, while forging a path toward growth and understanding. In this way, the new age was both an ending and a beginning, a quiet echo of the cycles that had preceded it, a reminder that creation and destruction are inseparable, and that wisdom is the most enduring treasure of all. Odin, Thor, Loki, and the humans who survived Ragnarok stood together, watching the worlds they had shaped, aware that the future would demand vigilance, courage, and continued learning. And yet, for the first time in countless ages, there was a profound serenity, a sense that the lessons of the past had been absorbed, and that the new world, fragile and wondrous, was ready to flourish under the guidance of those who had endured. In the gentle light of the new age, knowledge had taken on a sacred dimension. The devastation of Ragnarök had not only reshaped the physical world, but had stripped away illusions, pride, and ignorance, leaving behind clarity and opportunity. The surviving gods, tempered by loss and reflection, recognized that their power was not solely for protection or display, but for the cultivation and stewardship of wisdom. Odin, in particular, understood that knowledge was the most precious treasure of all, a force capable of shaping the destiny of mortals and immortals alike. The lessons of the past, etched in fire, blood, and cosmic upheaval, demanded preservation, interpretation, and transmission. Thus began the age of the guardians of knowledge. These were not merely teachers or scribes, they were sentinels of understanding, keepers of cosmic truths, interpreters of the subtle signs that threaded through all existence. The surviving gods chose humans, elves, dwarves, and spirits who had endured the cataclysm and who exhibited patience, insight, and courage. To these chosen beings, the divine imparted the runes, the sacred symbols of power, and the wisdom embedded in the fabric of reality. The transmission was not instantaneous nor simple. It required study, reflection, and discipline. Each pupil learned that knowledge carried responsibility, that the insight of the cosmos could illuminate paths or destroy them depending upon the heart and intent of the wielder. Odin, seated high upon the branches of Yggdrasil, shared lessons, not through commands but through riddles, stories, and visions. His one eye glimmered with the weight of countless truths, and the humans who sought his guidance learned to read the signs in the stars, the rustle of leaves, the patterns of rivers, and the whispers of the wind. He taught that wisdom was not simply the accumulation of facts, but the capacity to perceive connections, to recognize cause and effect, and to anticipate consequences across realms. Every lesson was a mirror. The more one reflected, the clearer the understanding became, yet the more one realized the vastness of what remained unknown. Thor, standing among mountains and rivers, conveyed lessons of practical power, ethics, and responsibility. While Mjolnir could summon storms and shatter stone, Thor instructed that strength without wisdom was dangerous. He demonstrated through controlled displays of power, showing how energy could nurture growth, protect communities, and maintain balance. Students learned to respect forces far greater than themselves, and to recognize the importance of timing, restraint, and empathy. Thor's teaching was physical and visceral. It impressed upon learners that comprehension of the universe required not only the mind but also the body, the senses, and the heart. Loki, though still mischievous and unpredictable, played a crucial role in shaping understanding. He revealed that knowledge was never linear or simple. Some truths were hidden, paradoxical, or intentionally obscured. Loki's lessons were subtle, designed to provoke thought, challenge assumptions, and reveal the unexpected. Through puzzles, illusions, and demonstrations of consequence, he taught that insight required flexibility of mind, creativity, and the willingness to embrace uncertainty. Those who studied under him learned to question, to anticipate hidden motives, and to navigate the complex interplay of intention and action. The divine lessons were intertwined with the growth of human societies. Villages, towns, and emerging cities became centers of learning where guardians shared knowledge openly, fostering literacy, critical thinking, and communal responsibility. Libraries, rune halls, and observatories were established, designed not only to store texts and artifacts, but to encourage contemplation and dialogue. Mortals studied the stars, the oceans, the forests, and the mountains, seeking patterns and principles that mirrored the guidance of the gods. Through careful observation and experimentation, they began to understand the rhythms of the natural world and the underlying principles that govern both life and magic. Artifacts and relics from the Old Age objects imbued with divine or cosmic energy were curated carefully. These treasures were not hoarded for power, but were studied as tools for learning. Some were weapons, some tools, others were symbolic keys to understanding cosmic phenomena. The guardians instructed that these items were dangerous in untrained hands, yet profoundly enlightening in the hands of those prepared to receive their teachings. Each artifact was a lesson in patience, observation, and discernment, requiring the student to engage both intellect and intuition. The runes, in particular, became a central focus of instruction. Each symbol contained layers of meaning, literal, philosophical, and mystical. A single rune could convey a principle of governance, a truth about nature, or a pattern of fate. Students were encouraged to meditate upon the runes, to trace their origins in the cosmos, and to perceive the subtle connections that link them across time and space. Through this practice, humans and spirits alike cultivated insight, learning not only to read symbols, but to understand the principles that shaped existence itself. Over time, the Guardians' influence extended beyond mere survival and curiosity. Communities began to flourish in harmony with the guidance of the gods. Ethical principles derived from divine lessons shaped laws, customs, and social structures. Justice, fairness, courage, and wisdom became cornerstones of human civilization. Conflicts, when they rose, were addressed not solely with force, but through reasoning, negotiation, and the careful application of learned principles. The world, scarred though it was, became a place where knowledge guided action and where foresight and understanding could prevent disasters before they manifested. The surviving gods themselves continued to evolve alongside humanity. Odin, ever reflective, realized that his role had shifted from ruler and warrior to mentor and observer. His focus was no longer conquest or dominance, but the subtle shaping of minds capable of sustaining a balanced world. Thor, still a protector, found satisfaction in watching humans wield newfound wisdom responsibly, channeling energy to create rather than destroy. Loki, paradoxically, found fulfillment in seeing trickery transformed into insight, chaos into revelation. Together, the gods had embraced their roles as facilitators of growth, understanding that their legacy was measured not by battles won, but by the enduring influence of the knowledge they imparted. The interconnectedness of all things became increasingly apparent to both gods and mortals. Yggdrasil stood not only as a physical anchor between realms, but as a metaphorical reminder that every action, thought, and decision reverberated across existence. Those who studied beneath its branches learned to perceive patterns, how human choices affected the natural world, how divine interventions rippled through mortal lives, and how the interplay of forces, both seen and unseen, shaped destiny. This awareness fostered a deep respect for the balance of life, and a recognition that wisdom carried with it the responsibility of stewardship. Even the creatures of the old world, including elves, dwarves, and spirits, contributed to the expansion of knowledge. They shared their ancestral wisdom, technical skills, and insights into natural forces that humans had long overlooked. Their collaboration with mortals created a renaissance of understanding, where magic and science, intuition and observation coexisted and complemented one another. The Guardians encouraged this cross-species collaboration, teaching that wisdom was not the province of one kind alone, but the fruit of collective insight. Challenges persisted. As they always do, some humans sought knowledge for selfish purposes, attempting to manipulate forces beyond their comprehension. The Guardians responded with patience, correction, and sometimes firm intervention, ensuring that the misuse of knowledge did not unravel the fragile balance. These challenges, however, were themselves lessons, cautionary tales that reinforced the principles of responsibility, foresight, and ethical consideration. Students learned that wisdom was inseparable from moral integrity, and that understanding without conscience could lead to catastrophe. Through decades and centuries, the traditions established by the Guardians of Knowledge became enduring pillars of civilization, schools of learning, sacred groves of meditation, and observatories aligned with cosmic rhythms flourished across the realms. Humans recorded not only history, but philosophy, astronomy, medicine, and ethics, blending practical knowledge with mystical insight. Communities thrived where the teachings of Odin, Thor, and even Loki were integrated into everyday life, creating cultures that valued reflection, creativity, and the thoughtful application of wisdom. Yet the Guardians also reminded all beings that knowledge was not static. The universe was ever-changing, and with it, understanding had to evolve. No lesson could be considered absolute. Every principle required continual observation, refinement, and application. This dynamic approach ensured that humanity and the surviving gods remained adaptable, capable of responding to challenges with insight rather than reaction. The world became a living classroom, a place where learning was endless and the pursuit of understanding was both duty and privilege. As the new age matured, the subtle influence of the Guardians extended beyond the immediate realms. Humans began to explore, mapping the lands, seas, and skies, seeking to uncover deeper truths about existence. Their discoveries, guided by divine insight, brought innovation and enlightenment, creating bridges between realms and revealing connections that had been hidden in the past. This expansion of knowledge reinforced the idea that wisdom was not simply preservation of what was known, but the courageous exploration of what remained to be understood. Ultimately, the Guardians of Knowledge created a legacy that transcended their own lifespans. The lessons of Ragnarök, the principles imparted by the gods, and the insights gained through observation and reflection became embedded in the very fabric of human civilization. Mortals and immortals alike recognized that the greatest triumph of the new age was not survival alone, but the cultivation of minds and hearts capable of sustaining a harmonious, enlightened, and resilient world. And so, the Age of the Guardians flourished, a testament to the enduring power of wisdom, the careful balance of guidance and autonomy, and the profound potential of beings divine and mortal to shape existence through understanding, reflection, and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. In the quiet moments beneath the branches of Yggdrasil, amidst the hum of life and the whispers of cosmic truth, All who listened could feel the pulse of a universe that taught, guided, and inspired, and knew that this age of knowledge would echo through eternity. Even as the new age flourished under the guidance of the surviving gods and the guardians of knowledge, a subtle unease lingered at the edges of the realms. The devastation of Ragnarök had been catastrophic, but the echoes of the old world were far from erased, hidden in remote corners of the cosmos and the freshly reborn lands. Remnants of giants, monstrous beasts, and chaotic forces remained. Their power diminished, but not extinguished. These were shadows of the past, entities that had survived by cunning, obscurity, or sheer resilience, waiting patiently for the opportunities the new world might inadvertently provide. The gods, though tempered by wisdom and experience, remained vigilant, aware that even in a world of renewed life, the past could rise again with dangerous consequences. Odin, perched high upon Yggdrasil, surveyed the realms with his piercing, single eye, noting subtle disturbances in the fabric of existence. Though the humans had learned much, and the surviving gods guided with care, certain places hummed with residual chaos. Forests in the northern reaches carried whispers of forgotten giants. Ruins in the east hinted at lingering malevolent spirits, and the deep caverns beneath the mountains trembled with the uneasy stirring of ancient forces. Odin understood that these remnants were not merely threats. They were tests, echoes that reminded all beings divine and mortal alike that vigilance was eternal. The past, he realized, was never truly gone. It was a shadow that lingered, shaping the present in quiet, insidious ways. Thor, ever the protector, moved through the mortal realms with both caution and confidence. Villages and emerging cities thrived, but the presence of old threats demanded constant attention. When storms or unusual disturbances arose, Thor investigated personally, wielding Mjolnir not just as a weapon, but as a stabilizing force. Lightning arced across the sky, illuminating the shadows that sought to creep into the lives of mortals. Yet even in the exercise of his might, Thor recognized that brute force alone could not fully dispel these ancient echoes. Understanding, strategy, and foresight were equally necessary. Strength had to be guided by wisdom. Power had to serve preservation rather than destruction. Loki, ever the trickster, observed the stirring shadows with a complex mixture of amusement, curiosity, and caution. The remnants of the past, he realized, were more than challenges. They were reflections of his own nature, forces that had once been harnessed or provoked by cunning, mischief, and deception. In these shadows, Loki saw potential and danger intertwined. He moved subtly among the realms, guiding mortals and gods alike to perceive hidden threats, to recognize illusions, and to anticipate the consequences of their actions. Through his interventions, he reminded all who followed that knowledge without vigilance and insight without foresight could be dangerously incomplete. The humans, increasingly adept at understanding the principles imparted by the guardians, faced these shadows with a mixture of awe and trepidation. Scholars, warriors, and leaders who had absorbed the teachings of Odin, Thor, and Loki found that the world, though reborn, was still a landscape of mystery and subtle danger. They began to organize themselves, creating watchful communities, patrols, and networks of observation. Knowledge and strategy were intertwined. Those who sought to protect the fragile peace understood that awareness and anticipation were as vital as courage and strength. Every shadow in the forests, every tremor in the mountains, and every whisper in the wind could carry a lesson, a warning, or a concealed threat. Among the most persistent shadows were remnants of the giants, colossal beings whose memories and instincts were shaped by ancient chaos. These survivors had learned to hide, to manipulate the environment, and to wait. Some were driven by revenge, others by hunger or instinct, and a few by strange, residual loyalties to the old powers. They were formidable, not in comparison to the surviving gods, but in their ability to evade, influence, and subtly disrupt. Odin, Thor, and Loki recognized that these giants served as a reminder that the past was never fully conquered. It lingered, shaping the future even when unseen. In addition to giants, monstrous creatures and spirits continued to roam the peripheries of existence. Forests that had been scarred by fire now teemed with beings adapted to survive the new age. Some were benevolent, guiding travelers and protecting sacred places. Others were malevolent, preying upon the unwary or attempting to reclaim territories once lost. The guardians of knowledge worked closely with humans to map, monitor, and understand these entities. They taught mortals to discern intent, to read subtle signs of presence, and to respond with appropriate measures, sometimes diplomacy, sometimes deterrence, and occasionally with the controlled application of force. The echoes of chaos were not limited to creatures. They manifested in residual magical disturbances, corrupted lands, and hidden relics infused with volatile energies. In the ruins of old fortresses and the deep caves of mountains, energies lingered that could destabilize a region if mishandled. Guardians, aided by the gods, guided mortals in safely studying and managing these relics. They emphasized the principle that power, without comprehension and responsibility, was a shadow that could consume its wielder. Each lesson, each expedition into these haunted or enchanted spaces became an opportunity to strengthen understanding, foster collaboration, and reinforce the harmony of the new age. Amid these challenges, the surviving gods also reflected upon their own past actions and miscalculations. Odin considered the consequences of his relentless pursuit of knowledge, recognizing how his obsessions had contributed to chaos in previous ages. Thor remembered moments when raw strength had caused unintended devastation, and Loki acknowledged the unforeseen consequences of mischief and cunning. Their reflections were not mere self-reproach. They were instructive, offering guidance to mortals who were observing and learning. By acknowledging the shadows of their own past, the gods demonstrated humility, responsibility, and the importance of foresight, principles that became foundational for the education of humanity. The interplay of light and shadow extended beyond tangible threats. Philosophical and moral challenges emerged as humanity expanded its influence. Mortals grappled with the ethical use of magic, governance, and power. The temptation to repeat mistakes of the past, arrogance, exploitation, and greed was ever present. The guardians of knowledge emphasized that vigilance was not only about recognizing external threats, but also about understanding the shadows within one's own heart. Wisdom required introspection, discipline, and the courage to correct one's path before harm was done. Legends of the old world, passed down through generations, also played a role in shaping perception. Stories of fallen giants, rogue spirits, and cataclysmic battles served as cautionary tales, guiding humans and younger beings to respect the balance of power and the fragility of life. These narratives were not merely entertainment. They were tools for cultivating awareness, empathy, and strategic thinking. By embedding the lessons of the past within the culture, the guardians ensured that humanity's understanding of the shadows was both practical and philosophical. The gods, too, continued to act subtly. Odin's insight allowed him to perceive disturbances before they manifested. Thor's might quelled localized threats before they escalated. Loki's cunning revealed hidden dangers, teaching both gods and mortals to anticipate deception and chaos. Together, they maintained a delicate balance, intervening only when necessary, ensuring that the lessons of the past were reinforced without stifling growth or autonomy. The shadows were formidable, but they were not invincible. Their persistence was a reminder of the consequences of neglect, arrogance, and inattention. Over time, the collaboration between humans, gods, and mystical beings led to innovations in both defense and understanding. Observation towers, enchanted wards, and knowledge-sharing councils were established across the realms. Humans learned to read natural omens, magical currents, and behavioral patterns of residual entities. The Guardians' teachings emphasized that understanding and foresight were forms of power, often more effective than sheer force. By cultivating these skills, mortals could coexist with the shadows of the past, mitigating their danger while preserving the integrity of the new age. The enduring presence of shadows also fostered philosophical inquiry. Scholars debated the nature of evil, chaos, and the balance of forces in the cosmos. They explored questions of destiny, free will, and the ethics of intervention. The surviving gods encouraged these discussions, highlighting that contemplation and reasoning were essential tools in navigating a world where the past, present, and potential future intertwined. These explorations deepened humanity's understanding of existence and strengthened the societal frameworks that would sustain civilization. Even as centuries passed, the shadows never fully disappeared. Some giants retreated to uncharted lands. Some spirits lingered in forgotten ruins. Some relics of power remained dormant yet potent. The gods and guardians recognized that the persistence of these shadows was not a flaw but an essential feature of the cosmos. The remnants of the old world served as constant reminders to respect forces greater than oneself, to act with wisdom, to anticipate consequences, and to honor the delicate balance between growth and destruction. The shadows were teachers in their own right, offering lessons for those capable of perceiving them. In this intricate tapestry of light and shadow, humans matured as a species. They learned that vigilance, humility, and cooperation were indispensable. They cultivated skills in observation, analysis, and judgment, creating a culture capable of managing both opportunity and threat. Communities thrived in regions previously considered perilous, guided by both divine insight and accumulated human experience. The shadows of the past, while never fully gone, became a measure of progress, a benchmark against which wisdom, courage, and resilience could be tested. Ultimately, the Age of Shadows revealed that the new world, though vibrant and promising, required continuous care. The interplay between light and dark, order and chaos, knowledge and ignorance, was eternal. The surviving gods, the guardians of knowledge, and humanity together embraced this reality, recognizing that the lessons of the past were inseparable from the potential of the future. Every shadow observed, every threat mitigated, and every discovery made reinforced the understanding that existence was an ongoing dialogue between forces seen and unseen. Thus, the age of the New World was not one of complacent peace, but of active awareness. The shadows of the past persisted, challenging the living to adapt, learn, and grow. Yet in facing these remnants, humans and gods alike demonstrated that wisdom, vigilance, and collaboration could preserve the balance of life. The echoes of Ragnarök remained, not as mere memories, but as living, persistent forces that guided, tested, and instructed all who walked the realms. And in this delicate interplay, the foundations of a lasting civilization, resilient and enlightened, were laid, ensuring that the lessons of the past would continue to shape the destiny of the cosmos. The world had endured cataclysm, chaos, and rebirth. It had witnessed the collapse of civilizations, the devastation of Ragnarök, and the emergence of a new age of knowledge, insight, and careful stewardship. Generations of humans, guided by the surviving gods and the guardians of knowledge, had learned the lessons of power, wisdom, and responsibility. They had observed the cycles of creation and destruction, studied the shadows of the past, and cultivated the discipline necessary to harmonize with the rhythms of existence. Yet even as the world reached a relative equilibrium, the greatest revelation remained. The true legacy of the gods was not in conquest, power, or treasure, but in the imprint they left on the hearts, minds, and spirits of those who inherited the cosmos. Odin, seated in contemplation atop Yggdrasil, reflected on the entirety of this vast, unfolding story. He had seen countless generations rise and fall, watched the interplay of mortal ingenuity and divine guidance, and observed the lessons etched across time. His singular, piercing eye, which had once burned with insatiable hunger for knowledge and power, now glimmered with tempered understanding. He recognized that the world's true strength lay not in the might of gods, but in the wisdom, resilience, and adaptability of the mortals who had learned to act with insight and foresight. Every tree, river, and star was a testament to the dialogue between divine guidance and mortal courage, a reminder that legacy was measured not by dominion, but by influence and stewardship. Thor, who had once wielded Mjolnir to command storms and crush foes, now found his purpose in protection and preservation. His strength was no longer exercised impulsively or for display, but with careful consideration, ensuring that the power entrusted to him reinforced harmony and stability. He moved among humans and the natural world alike, demonstrating through both example and action that responsibility was inseparable from power. The lessons of restraint, timing, and balance had been hard-earned, and through them, mortals came to understand that strength without wisdom could easily tip the scales toward chaos. Thor's presence remained a pillar of reassurance, a living embodiment of controlled, ethical might. Loki, forever the trickster and agent of transformation, had embraced a role as teacher, provocateur, and guide. His mischief was no longer purely chaotic. It became a tool to challenge assumptions, encourage innovation, and sharpen perception. Through riddles, paradoxes, and carefully constructed tests, he taught that uncertainty and disruption were not inherently dangerous, but rather opportunities for insight, adaptation, and creativity. The mortals and immortal beings who learned under Loki's guidance discovered that the universe contained infinite variables and hidden forces, and that wisdom required curiosity, imagination, and the courage to navigate complexity without fear. The humans, deeply enmeshed in this new age, had grown into a civilization shaped by reflection, collaboration, and understanding. They had learned to read the signs in the stars, interpret the language of nature, and wield both technology and magic responsibly. Communities were governed with insight, justice, and ethical foresight. Education extended beyond the accumulation of facts to the cultivation of critical thinking, emotional intelligence, and philosophical awareness. Mortals understood that every action, whether personal, political, or magical, resonated across the cycles of existence, and they embraced the responsibility that came with such knowledge. The guardians of knowledge continued to serve as the bridge between the divine and mortal realms. They preserved the lessons of the past, guided the application of wisdom in the present, and nurtured the capacity for foresight into the future. Libraries, rune halls, and observatories became not only centers of learning, but also sanctuaries of reflection, where the mysteries of the cosmos were studied with care, and ethical principles were embedded into the very fabric of culture. Art, music, and literature flourished, reflecting both the beauty of the cosmos and the moral, philosophical, and spiritual truths learned through millennia of observation. Even as centuries passed, the shadows of the past persisted, remnants of chaos, ancient creatures, and unpredictable forces, yet they no longer dominated existence. Instead, they became instruments of vigilance, reminders that wisdom required perpetual awareness. Encounters with these shadows served as practical, lessons in adaptation, strategy, and ethical judgment. Giants, spirits, and remnants of the old order were no longer threats to be destroyed outright, but teachers whose presence emphasized reflection, caution, and respect for the balance of power. The cycle of existence, once a source of fear and uncertainty, had become a framework for deliberate, enlightened action. Through all of this, the cosmic tree Yggdrasil remained the central symbol of connection, continuity, and balance. Its roots and branches extended across realms, anchoring worlds, spirits, and mortal civilizations alike. Beneath its shelter, knowledge flowed, life thrived, and beings of every kind, human, divine, and mystical, interacted in harmony. Yggdrasil became a living library, a bridge between past and future, mortal and divine, chaos and order. Its presence reminded all who beheld it that existence was not merely a series of events, but an interconnected web of relationships, choices, and consequences. The legacy of the gods was also reflected in the principles that govern the mortal world: ethical governance, equitable justice, environmental stewardship, and the responsible use of knowledge were embedded into society. Mortals developed systems to ensure that wisdom was preserved, shared, and applied with fairness. Conflicts, when they arose, were approached with negotiation, reflection, and strategic foresight. Guided by the lessons taught by the gods, the understanding of history and the patterns of cycles became a cornerstone of civilization, ensuring that mistakes of the past were mitigated and lessons were internalized. For future generations, spiritual practices matured in parallel with intellectual and societal growth. Meditation, rituals, and ceremonies were designed to attune mortals to the rhythms of the cosmos, fostering alignment with the endless cycles of creation and renewal. Individuals were encouraged to reflect on their actions, observe the consequences of choices, and cultivate virtues of patience, humility, courage, and insight. Through these practices, the spiritual and material realms became integrated, reinforcing the understanding that the well-being of the world depended upon the harmony of mind, heart, and action. The story of Ragnarök, once a tale of apocalypse and destruction, transformed into a narrative of resilience, insight, and continuity. Mortals learned that even catastrophic events contained lessons to be preserved, analyzed, and transmitted. They understood that survival was not sufficient. Wisdom and ethical application of knowledge were equally essential. The experiences of gods, giants, and mortals alike were recorded, celebrated, and studied, becoming the foundation for future generations to navigate challenges with prudence and vision. In the broader cosmos, the gods observed with satisfaction that their guidance had borne fruit. Mortals had become stewards of the world, capable of perceiving subtle forces, responding to threats, and cultivating harmony within complexity. The endless cycle of creation and destruction continued, yet it no longer dictated the fate of civilizations through chaos and ignorance. Instead, it became a tool for reflection, preparation, and deliberate action. The past, present, and future were interwoven in a tapestry of understanding, and the lessons of every age informed the choices of the next. The final legacy, however, was not simply knowledge, power, or stewardship. It was inspiration. The survivors of Ragnarök, mortals and gods alike, had demonstrated that even in the aftermath of cosmic catastrophe, life could flourish, wisdom could be cultivated, and civilizations could rise in harmony with the principles of balance, ethics, and foresight. Their example served as a reminder that the universe, though vast and often unpredictable, could be navigated with courage, insight, and responsibility. Odin, Thor, and Loki, having fulfilled their roles as teachers, guides, and stewards, began to step back from direct intervention. Their presence remained, but it became subtle, woven into the fabric of existence through the systems of knowledge, the ethical frameworks, and the institutions established by mortals. Under their guidance, the gods had imparted not only wisdom, but the capacity for mortals to continue learning, evolving, and maintaining balance long after divine presence receded from immediate view. In this final stage, humanity, alongside elves, dwarves, and other mystical beings, embraced their roles as the inheritors of the cosmos. They recognized that the legacy of the gods was not a set of rules or dictates, but the capacity to act with discernment, foresight, and compassion. Every choice, every innovation, every act of reflection became a continuation of the divine guidance imparted. Through centuries of experience, civilization became a living testament to resilience, learning, and the enduring power of knowledge applied ethically. The world, now stable yet vibrant, reflected the culmination of all that had come before. Shadows of the past were no longer threats but teachers. Cycles of destruction had become opportunities for reflection and growth. The knowledge of the cosmos had been integrated into the fabric of mortal understanding. Mortals could walk beneath the branches of Yggdrasil, study the stars, and engage with the forces of magic, science, and philosophy with awareness, respect, and purpose. The gods' influence persisted not as domination, but as inspiration, a reminder of what had been learned, what could be achieved, and what responsibilities came with wisdom. The story of the cosmos, from creation to Ragnarök and beyond, reached its quiet, enduring conclusion in this age of understanding. Mortals and immortals alike had learned that power alone was fleeting, that knowledge alone was incomplete without wisdom, and that the cycles of life, death, and renewal required reflection, balance, and deliberate action. The universe continued its eternal rhythm, but now it was a rhythm navigated with insight, guided by ethical stewardship, and illuminated by the legacy of all who had endured, learned, and taught. And so, the age of gods and mortals, of chaos and wisdom, of shadows and enlightenment, settled into harmony. The lessons of the past were preserved, the knowledge of the present applied, and the potential of the future safeguarded. Yggdrasil stretched across realms, a living symbol of continuity and connection, and beneath its branches life diverse, complex, and flourishing continued, guided by the principles that had emerged from the trials of Ragnarök. The story had reached an ending, yet it remained a beginning, a foundation upon which new generations could grow, explore, and understand the infinite mysteries of the cosmos, forever carrying the eternal legacy of the gods, the cycles, and the enduring pursuit of wisdom. In the beginning, there was silence, a void between fire and ice. From this stillness, the first shapes stirred, and the worlds slowly took form. Out of frost came a giant, and from fire came the first spark of life. Together they gave rise to gods, to lands, and to the tree that would hold all realms within its roots and branches. The gods lived in Asgard, high and golden, where they watched over the worlds below. They feasted in halls of light, yet always knew that shadows lingered at the edges of creation. Among them was Odin, who sought wisdom and sacrifice, Thor, whose hammer guarded the skies, and Loki, the trickster, whose cleverness often blurred into betrayal. Stories unfolded gently, like threads in a tapestry, the making of the world, the shaping of men and women, the weaving of fate by three quiet sisters at the base of the world tree. Every act carried meaning, every gesture echoed across the ages. Yet even in a world of gods, endings were foretold. Baldr, bright and beloved, would fall. Bonds of trust would break. The wolf Fenrir would grow restless, and the serpent beneath the sea would stir. The cycle moved slowly, like the turn of seasons, but always toward an ending that was also a beginning. When Ragnarök came, it was fire and frost meeting once more. The sky cracked, The seas rose, gods fell, and the great tree shook. But as the storm passed, quiet returned. From the ashes of the old, green shoots rose again. A new dawn for a new world. In this cycle, nothing is ever truly lost. The gods may fade, but life returns. Humanity, fragile yet enduring, awakens once more beneath the shelter of the cosmic tree. The pattern continues, soft and eternal. Creation, destruction, renewal. And so the story drifts like a lullaby, a reminder that even endings hold within them the seeds of beginnings. That in the vast stillness of the cosmos, life always finds a way to rise again.